Hello and welcome once again to F Sobriety. I am Craig Woods, the real one, I hope, and not a stunt-casted replacement brought in to service a cheap gag towards the end of the podcast.
And I am James Hamilton, and I'm not the cute type of crazy. Welcome to F Sobriety.
So, James, listeners, tonight we're back on the Mr. Robot train. We're ploughing along into more of Season 1. We are about to discuss Season 1, Episode 7. What is the title, James?
The title is View Source.
But before we get to that, we do, of course, have something else on our plate that we need to clear up.
Yep, we need to wipe our plate clean and lick it.
Right, exactly.
Now, for long-time listeners of the podcast, if there are such a thing,
looking at you, Argentina,
they may remember early days of our podcast. We had some thoughts about the HBO television series Lovecraft Country, where much of the podcast was spent with one of us defending it and the other quite intensely disliking it. Well, we're doing as a tulpa. And tonight, Craig, I believe we have thoughts on this, on the endings of Wandavision, which differ quite significantly. However, before we get to the ending, the last time we did an episode about Wandavision was episode 6, so we haven't recorded a podcast for 3 episodes.
That's correct. So we've got quite a wee bit of the I's that need dotted and T's that need crossed, so we better do some of that first. Before we proceed with the Wandavision action, however, I'm going to briefly hand over to the Hamiltron so that those of you who are here for the Mr. Robot discussion can just head straight there if this Wandavision discussion is not quite your bag. Hamiltron, take it away.
I guess once again I have to pick up the slack here. Alright, if you don't want to listen to 2 grown-ass men talking about comic nerd shit and pop music, skip to 1 hour and 53 and 30 seconds for the rewatch discussion about Mr. Robot Season 1 Episode 7. It also falls to me to remind listeners that this is a rewatch podcast, so be aware that as ever, this episode contains spoilers for the entirety of the series of Mr. Robot. And on a more serious note, the discussion around this episode of Mr. Robot in particular includes discussion about male violence against women, which some listeners may find upsetting. As always, listener discretion is advised. We love you. Now back to these 2 fucking idiots talking about kitty shit.
I guess that's what we get for not asking super politely.
Like it makes a difference at this point.
I mean, she was quite polite last time, but you know,
yeah, you don't want too much of a good thing.
yeah, she has her own thoughts on the matter, obviously.
Alright, James, so here's the first thing I need to say about this. I need to take us both to task here, because we sort of made what turned out to be a very ill-advised decision and recorded our last episode the night before episode 7 of Wandavision aired, which, looking back, was a really stupid idea. But alas, listeners, given our schedules, it was just about one of the only times that we can come together and record an episode. And of course, the world being as it is, every time we record an episode, something monumental did occur, and we entirely missed that fabulous zeitgeist Agatha all along moment, and we were both pretty gutted. So yeah, we've got quite a bit of catching up to do, I guess. Now that said, James, I have to be honest and say I don't know that I've got a terrible amount to say about episodes 7 and 8 now. I think maybe if we'd recorded earlier I would have had more to say. I feel like the energy has been sapped out of me to talk about those, and my saying that has probably just clued the listeners in as to which of the 2 of us is more favourable towards the finale.
Who's the white vision of the pair of us here? In case the listeners are wondering, Craig is on the side of the fence, which, to be fair, he's not lonely over there, if the internet is anything to go by.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel pretty lonely. It feels like this often happens though when we have these conversations, that I only ever seem to see, or I seem to only ever be able to concentrate on the takes out there that are diametrically opposed to my own.
I know I saw quite a lot of takes on the last episode that had a variety of problems with it, and to be fair, not all of which I disagreed with, but in general, I really enjoyed that. But before we get there, so what happened in episodes 7 and 8 before we reach 9?
Episode 7 was the 2000 style sitcom.
Yep.
And to be honest, as far as the comedy side of it goes, that was maybe my least favourite of all the sitcom episodes, which has not helped, I think, in my mind, when I look back at the show, I do feel now like this latter third of it, I'm just a bit down on. As a matter of fact, though, as you will remember, I wasn't actually that down on it at the time, but it's just the finale has kind of coloured certain things for me in a certain way that obviously I was not completely cognizant of at the time when I was first watching those episodes. But that, as far as the sitcom format goes, where it was at its most successful, where the show used it most successfully, was in the earlier decades, I personally feel. That said, though, I do think the comparable lack of humour in that particular episode, or at least I felt there was one, and maybe just because that form of sitcom doesn't work that well for me, kind of added to that the whole atmosphere of Wanda starting to become a bit dislocated from the world that she'd created, and so I guess it did amp up that. So who knows, maybe it being less funny was kind of deliberate.
I feel like it was, because in terms of, you look at the arc of WandaVision from start to finish, according to Jack Schaefer and Matt Shackman, the narrative of WandaVision was the 5 stages of grief.
Right,
and episode 7 was depression.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it wasn't that funny. My biggest problem with episode 7 is that it wasn't 2 broke girls, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, there was a part of me, I remember we joked about that as well. It'd be super cool if Kat Dennings got cast as a waitress in Westview, and if Randall-Park got cast in some kind of equivalent of his role in Fresh Off the Boat. I was kind of hoping it would go meta that way, but it didn't. It feels like a missed opportunity. But yeah, I mean, to be fair to the show, I did not find that episode particularly funny, but I think it reminded me a lot of some of the very early kind of meta sitcoms that I look back on from the 2000s that I never really got on with that well. And I think for me personally, that format did not really come into itself until the 2010s. But it did remind me a lot of, there was a lot of very white middle class American sitcoms of that type, all of which featured characters I generally found kind of insufferable. And I look back on that now, and perhaps subconsciously I was reacting to Wanda in a way which would turn out to be quite precognitive, given some of the things I now feel about her after the finale.
I was surprised to read that episode, particularly the sitcom in question, was meant to be Modern Family.
I had a feeling that's what it was going for.
And I'd never seen Modern Family, I had no idea. So
I've not seen very much of it. Like, I've seen maybe not even a whole episode, but I've seen like bits and bobs of several episodes.
So I took the speaking directly to camera thing as being The Office / Parks and Recreation. And then I was surprised to learn later that Modern Family had a similar thing, but Modern Family isn't shot like a mockumentary like Parks and The Office was. They just have fourth wall breaking asides to camera for no reason, so I don't know.
It's similar to Malcolm in the Middle in that sense, I guess.
Yep. But I did think that the Office intro music, though, was pretty good. I liked it. It was very like The Office. But yeah, so in that episode we found out that everyone's theories were completely wrong. There was no Reed Richards, there was no Victor Von Doom, there was no Riri Williams. There was a lady who was a scientist and in the military, and she'd made a rover in order to get Monica back into the Hex. Now,
let me just interject here for a bit, because there seems to be some disagreement online about whether that lady you are talking about was who Monica had been talking about prior. A lot of people seem to think she had been talking about somebody else. And I'll be honest, I'm not entirely clear about it.
Well, see, I watched a long-ass interview with Matt Shackman recently, and he was asked who was the aerospace engineer, and his response was, I didn't realise everyone was going to think it was the Fantastic Four.
Right, I guess you wouldn't.
He said they spent ages on that episode in particular, and that episode was all about Monica Rambeau getting her powers. That scene was, everything was building up to Monica Rambeau becoming a superhero, and he's like, and I was reading everyone going, oh, it's going to be the Fantastic Four, and he's like, no, no, that's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, fair enough.
We all thought it was going to be something it's not, but that's the week-to-week format for you. You know, it makes people come up with.
I think I've seen some takes out there about this that I don't entirely. I understand where people are coming from when they say this stuff, but I do think there's people who have been very cerebral about all of this and are being a bit harsh on the TV viewing audience when they say this kind of stuff. I've seen takes that say, you know, people have. It's similar to something we said on a previous episode, but it's not the same. We said earlier on a previous episode, that there are definitely people who have forgotten how to watch week to week, or maybe they've just never experienced it week to week. I mean, there are people young enough now that they've, binge watching is just about the only thing they've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people saying that it's gone as far as audiences now can no longer tell the difference between a mystery box show and a show that is not remotely a mystery box show, and so therefore people just expect every show to be a mystery box. I think that's quite an unfair take, because I guarantee you, if social media existed 30 years ago, you would have exactly these same conversations about whatever was in telly. In fact, if you had it in the 80s, people would be talking about it about Dynasty.
Yep.
You know what I mean? This is just a natural part of when you have an episodic format that's got a distinct period between each segment that is dished out. That naturally leaves the audience with time to speculate, and if they're properly enveloped in the story as you want them to be, then of course they're going to come up with all kinds of theories. Some of them might be fairly banal, others might be super exotic, and that's just the way it goes. That's part of audience participation.
Yep.
And I think it's weird to scold people for that. I think it's one of the good things that all narrative fiction does, really. It allows people to interject themselves into fictional characters' lives, and that's kind of the fun of it. It's one of the things that makes us human, It's I just find it a bit of a weird take, and I have seen a lot of people sharing that kind of stuff, like scolding people for having theorised too much. We did plenty of theorising on this podcast. I'm not mad that none of our theories came to pass. I don't care about that.
Me neither, because we had
there's
fun
a lot
doing
about
it.
the finale, which we'll come to, which I was not happy with. None of them have anything to do with the theories we come up with. And exactly, it was fun. It's a game that you play with narratives when they're served to you this way.
Yeah, it's like you say about in the mid-'80s, if Twitter was around, it would have been like, holy fuck, who shot JR? Hashtag who shot JR?
Yeah.
Who killed Laura Palmer?
Right, yeah. Take a drink for a Twin Peaks reference. More on that later.
So yeah, that was episode 7. Monica made it back into the hex. She went all glowy and gloopy. Darcy got to have some good lines. Darcy
had some immense lines in that episode. That was a Darcy-tastic episode. I'm glad we got that, because I was super disappointed by her general lack of presence in the finale. But
debriefs are lame.
I didn't even particularly enjoy the lines she was given in the finale, to be honest. It felt a bit perfunctory to me, but that's the least of my problems with finale. But more on that later.
So Monica confronted Wanda, showed a wee bit of powers, like, hey, and then Agatha pulled her away, took her into the basement, and we got the reveal of the Darkhold and spells, and hello, my name is Agatha Harkness.
Agatha Harkness.
And I killed Sparky too.
A great moment, but in retrospect now it makes me sad, because for me this was the moment after which Catherine Hahn's character became way less interesting.
I think she got to use her comedy chops far less, definitely, after this, and her comedy chops are wild.
They are.
They are incredible.
I've generally seen her most in comedy stuff, so I'm sure she is just as skilled at drama. I think, for me personally, I think her character was written very poorly from this point on. I don't even know who that character is. That's the problem. Was she even a character? I'll have more to say this when we discuss the finale.
She is Agatha, eager for fun.
She wears a smile. Everybody run. Take a drink, everyone.
So yeah, that was episode 7, which brought us swiftly on to episode 8.
It's funny how that happens.
As they do. The flashback episode. But before the flashback episode, we got to see Agatha's quote-unquote origin story, which was rushed, but what are you going to do? It's 9 episodes.
I felt... So this is where my heart started to sink about this show a wee bit, because I did not need that entire scene. And to be honest, I look back and think I don't even know why we got it, because it told me nothing I needed to know particularly. That time could have been better spent actually telling me who Agatha is, rather than once upon a time there was a bunch of witches who decided she was a wrong un, and then she used their magic against them the end. So what I've learned is she's a wrong un, which she already informed us about the previous episode. Yeah, I did not need that scene. I could have done with something a bit meatier.
I feel like that scene was specifically put in with the intent of showing the audience Agatha does a snack on magic. She snacks on yo magic.
She gobbles that shit up the way Killer Bob gobbles up Garmin Bozier.
Take another. Jesus,
take
I'm going to be steaming before we even get to the finale here, man.
But I mean, she literally comes out and says that as well in the finale. So if they're just going to throw exposition into our mouth, I don't know why we needed that scene as well.
Sorry, I watched a couple episodes of The Witcher last night. I forgot there's a moment in The Witcher where the bard is saying something and he just stops and says, "There I go again, just spouting exposition."
Yeah, no, generally speaking though, otherwise I enjoyed that flashback episode. Elizabeth Olsen, who by the way has been so great on this show, she really got to do some great work on that episode. It's a horrible thing to have to say, but it seems kind of ghoulish, but it's great watching a skilled actor go through pain with their character.
Yep.
And Elizabeth Olsen really emoted her trauma exceptionally well, I thought. So I really dug most of that episode, but there was a part of me that was like, I'm starting to have misgivings about where this might be going. But
for me, I loved that episode. I thought it was brilliant. I loved that it tied everything back to stuff we'd seen before, and it showed a little more of what we'd heard.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of it, I was like, oh, there's one episode left. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
But I genuinely loved that episode. I thought it was brilliant. It showed in case we weren't aware, it showed us that Hayward was a wrong'un.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really obvious wrong'un reveals in this episode.
There was. I mean, nobody can ever accuse the MCU generally of being too subtle.
Have you ever seen Rambo 5? Not Monica Rambeau, but the movie.
Which one is Rambo 5? What happens in Rambo 5? I know they are difficult to differentiate.
This thing is, it's just called Rambo. It was like the fifth one. It's the one where there's a bunch of...
is that the most recent one?
No, it's the second most recent one. I think it's a bunch of people.
Seen that one.
I think it's about like a warlord in like Myanmar that he has to go and take down.
Right, aye, that sounds familiar. I think I've seen that one.
Do you remember...
It's ludicrously violent,
yeah.
I seem to recall.
Do you remember the opening 15 minutes where they're like, here are the bad guys, and this is why they're the bad guys?
Oh,
you see them stabbing women to death and throwing a baby
in a
baby
in a fire. Yeah, okay, yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, I do. That stays with me. I do remember thinking to myself, all right, Stallone.
Yeah.
Because Stallone directed that, didn't he?
Yeah. With his subtle hand.
He hasn't lost it.
This was the MCU equivalent of going, do you want to know who the bad guys are? Well, here you go.
Right, aye, there was a lot of that. And, to be honest, I did have misgivings about that, but I was still open to seeing what the finale was going to say about. I mean, if the finale had paid off in a way that I found satisfying, then I would be quite willing to forgive all of this stuff. But now I look back at it going, okay, no. Okay, no.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about Elizabeth Olsen's performance, though. And I'm really glad she got this episode to really shine dramatically. Like, she'd earned this episode. She paid her dues, and she got to do all the good stuff. The little kid that played her as young Wanda was amazing as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It was good kid casting.
Yep.
Which is a tough thing to do.
Most of the time... kids can bolt, but it reminded everyone that Tony Stark was a scumbag, in case you forgot.
Yeah, I did appreciate that detail, actually. Although, in saying that, another bugbear I did have about that episode was in that same scene when Wanda's mother's looking out the window and there's
literally
a battle out in the street, and she's just like, it's another one of those battles, like she's looking at a thundercloud. It's like, looks like rain and war. It's like, I don't think that, I mean, I completely accept that people who live in war-torn areas, yeah, they're used to some extent to this stuff taking place, but when there's an actual gun battle taking place in your very own street, I don't think the reaction is to close your curtain over and pretend you didn't see it.
My question is, who was our dad trying to sell the bootleg DVDs to out in the street? It's like, put down your Kalashnikov for a second, I've got a DVD box set of How I Met Your Mother.
Well, my memories, the last time I ever tried to do this was maybe over 10 years ago, but I remember every now and again when I used to try to go to Missing Records in Glasgow to sell the dregs of my DVD collection or the dregs of my CD collection when I was starting to go to digital formats, and it was diminishing returns each time you went there, and there was a point at which I was like, okay, this is not happening anymore. That's what it reminded me of. I was like, yeah, he needs to get himself on eBay, that guy.
Yep. So yeah, we learned that she didn't take Vision's body after all. It was great. We can't talk about this episode without talking about the line that launched 1,000 memes.
Right, okay.
It was the "What is grief but love persevering."
I found the fanfare around that line really strange. It's not that I think it's a bad line, I think it's fine. It's a serviceable enough line in what was actually a nicely played scene. But there were a lot of people acting like it was the most profound thing they'd ever heard, which, okay, fair enough.
It's indicative of the quality of writing in contemporary television.
Well, that's exactly what's going to be my point.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of garbage that we do consume, particularly in the binge TV culture. I think we've become a lot less discriminatory about what we imbibe. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, Paul Bettany's delivery of it was pretty beautiful. The whole scene was nicely played, but it's a sentiment that you do find that identical sentiment literally in the printed messages in Hallmark sympathy cards. So, guys out there, if you want more of that, hit up your local card shop. They've got all the good stuff.
I like, though, that Vision's understanding of human emotion is the same as, like, a Hallmark card, though. Like, as an AI, he's, like, taken all this knowledge of humanity and it's boiled down to this one thing, which is just like, I guess it's the same as a card message then? Is it a universal truth? Or is it just like baseline human emotion?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, I suppose it does kind of work. Like I said, I didn't have a problem with the line. It wasn't until I saw the reaction to it, I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, like
people are really starved for profundity in their cultural text.
Yeah, when I heard it, I was like, oh, nice one, nice line. But then I didn't expect it to be so beloved. But it did have some good. There was some good memes came from it. So.
It birthed many fantastic, fabulous memes.
As this show in general has done. So
I was going to say this show has been an absolute goldmine for memes. We might, in fact, let's have a meme roundup. Once we've got into social disticuffs over our feelings on the finale, maybe we'll have a palate cleanser by discussing some of our favourite memes.
There's the nice little Shia LaBeouf moment in the TV studio where Catherine Hahn channels Shia LaBeouf, does the slow clap, and then they run back outside, and Catherine Hahn gets to utter the name. She's the first person in the MCU to say the words. And
I don't know about you, but I immediately imagined Pee-wee's Playhouse when the secret word gets spoken.
Yeah, I did me a scream.
I enjoyed the drop of Scarlet Witch. Hearing it spoken was quite a thrill. However, something did distract me in that final moment, and it was the first appearance of Agatha's costume, which frankly, that was not good. That looked like something you could have picked off the rack in Woolworths back in the day in the lead up to Halloween. That was not good.
It did look a bit like some curtains. It's not the best costume.
I'm sure I had a goth girlfriend in the early 90s who wore that. Just kidding, I never had a girlfriend. I was too busy reading Vision and Scarlet Witch.
And going, I'll never see this in the telly. But yeah, I think that her costume was a bit of a letdown. Even her smoky eye makeup was a bit... You know, I feel like they could have spent a bit longer.
Left a fair bit to be desired.
Yep. I think Agatha deserved a better costume.
And a story and a character, to be honest.
Maybe we'll get more of that in future. More on that later. To be fair, like, I like the weight that they've given to the name the Scarlet Witch as being a title. You know, it wasn't just like, oh, you're a spellcaster with reddish magic. You're a Scarlet Witch. You know,
you're some kind of Scarlet Witch.
You know, because I assumed that would be why she got named Scarlet Witch, because we knew she was going to get her name this show from earlier in the series when Hayward was like...
Hayward completely signposted it.
She doesn't have a funny name
in
yet.
Flashing neon lights.
Question mark, question mark, question mark.
So no pseudonym. So we're clear on that. No pseudonym, no code name. So that means no code name. So that means she has only been known as Wanda Maximoff. That's Wanda Miss Maximoff. All right, Hayward, we get it. Jesus Christ.
No funny Avenger name. She's not called the Scarlet Witch. Just so we're clear. More on that later. Cool guys, we got this. But yeah, I loved that. I loved that moment. I squeed. I screamed. I watched that episode a bunch of times, and then in the post credits we got White Vision, which has done nothing to quell my theory that we're going to get a West Coast Avengers at some point.
Yeah, I think that could be a good call. Speaking of the White Vision, one of my favourite tweets about it was from Latonya Starks from the Post-Show Recaps podcast. She was tweeting as she was watching that episode. When it came to that bit at the end, she said, #Vision so white.
The white dog shite Vision.
It totally looks like an old school dog shit. Whatever happened to white dog shit? Ask your parents, kids.
I was going to say, how well is that joke going to land? Or is it just people of our age? No
I
jokes
think maybe
about
we're
white
the
dog.
last generation who can even remember white dog shit, so I don't think it's got much of a future, to be honest.
No future for white dog shit.
It's a sad day.
Then you're Rage Against the Machine album.
Into it.
Which then brought us up to the climactic episode.
Alright, so...
Do you want to go
crack
first?
my knuckles.
Shall we take
Well,
turns?
I'll tell you what, I'll go first and I'll tell you what I liked about this episode, because there were things I liked about it.
Then I'll tell you what I didn't like, and then you tell me what you didn't like, and I'll say what I liked, and that way we end on kind of a positive.
So you can have the final word. Is that how this goes? You are literally the Wanda Maximoff in this battle. You're getting your own way while pretending that you've engaged in a fair battle, but it's rigged all along.
I've put my runes up.
More on that in a moment. I'll go first with a positive thing. The battle between Vision and White Vision, I think, is one of the best things I've ever seen in the MCU. It was completely true to the character, and it did all the right things in terms of it was an action-packed battle for the first half, so it hit all those bases. And then for the second half, it really went to the kind of really existential root of that character. Because Vision is a character who is always questioning what's real, regardless. You know, even if he wasn't in this scenario replaced with faced with a doppelganger, he's one of those characters who is always contemplating the nature of his own existence and his own place amongst humans. And so the whole thing, bringing up the Ship of Theseus conundrum, which I love whenever that's brought up, it's one of my favourite tropes. I do quite enjoy that. It's very difficult to do that trope wrong, to be honest. It's always good fun, and I think they made brilliant use of it here. And again, I have to sing Paul Bettany's praises. He was so good. I know some people might think that acting the part of the White Vision is an easy thing because he's essentially that bit more robotic. But there's a lot of nuance going in that performance. Like when you flick back and forth from Vision to Vision, they're so different. Mm-hmm. It's little subtle touches. It was stellar acting, and I really enjoyed the dialogue. And I really felt the weight of the conundrum itself, and really felt the weight of the White Vision being made to consider its own existence and what that meant. It was beautiful. It was perfect. If every battle in the MCU could be that perfect, or even half that perfect, I don't think I'd ever have a complaint about the MCU. It was brilliant. It was everything. It was both everything that my child self would have wanted to see Vision do, and also everything that my adult self really digs about this kind of slightly more cerebral aspects that they get to play around with in these things. So that was top quality.
It was great.
Very satisfying. The other thing I absolutely adored in this episode was we finally got to see the Scarlet Witch costume. And likewise, it was a perfect blend of the classic and the modern. They got it absolutely 100% right. Whoever the costume designer was on this show, just give them all the awards for that costume, because it was amazing. It was everything. It was classic enough that my kid self was like, oh, that is totally the Scarlet Witch. And yet it was just on the right side of quote-unquote realistic.
Yeah, it was practical enough to be believable.
Yeah, totally. It was amazing, and Elizabeth also looks fantastic wearing it. Yeah, it was great. Every time she was on screen with that costume, even later in the episode where I was like, this kind of sucks, I was still like, but she looks amazing. That costume is fantastic.
In the interview I watched with Matt Shackman, which I should cite sources, especially because I saw a tweet by Mark Bernardin earlier today calling out news sources that cite Fat Man Beyond without mentioning it. It was on Fat Man Beyond. The full episode was an interview with Matt Shackman. Matt Shackman was saying that there was discussion over how big to make the wimple. He thought that they got it just the right size. He said they went for a much bigger one and it didn't look right.
Yeah, I think it was...
Yeah, they started off comic-sized and gradually decreased it till it was just big enough.
I mean, depending on who the artist was, it used to change dimensions anyway.
True that.
Besides, no, I think they hit the nail just right. It looked perfect.
They hit the wimple on the head.
Hey you, we have ourselves a wimple. Come on over to our place.
Your hashtag worked.
They heard me. Finally someone heard me.
The power of social media.
And as short as that list is, I'm sorry to say, that is about all I can say positively about this finale.
Dr. Negenstein over here.
So you're going to end as the Optimist Prime.
I mean, we'll do a sum up anyway between us. What I didn't enjoy about the finale was, I think, something that most people who said they didn't enjoy. We've all seen CGI blasty battles before.
Yeah. So this was one of my bugbears, and it's by no means the biggest problem I have with this episode, but oh god.
And I mean,
I'll let you finish.
Yes, don't get me wrong, it's an MCU movie, so I assume at some point there's going to be a flying CGI battle or a sky beam. And they've got me on the hook enough that I don't mind so much, but I just would have liked to have seen more quote unquote magic of the ilk that we saw in Doctor Strange, that kind of thing, where he done all sorts of weird shit in Doctor Strange.
Right,
and there's the moment where, Agatha says you're more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, but we didn't really see that. We just saw some really big runes.
Absolutely.
Does size matter where runes are concerned? Does she just check my runes, guys?
Yeah, that was a bizarre touch. I thought it was why are they giant? Does that particularly matter? I mean, I do not enjoy this spectacle of having two opposing characters against a shifting backdrop of CGI bullshit, just engaging in this CGI energy ball tennis. I think we've seen that so many times that it's so played out, it's so tedious, and I personally have never enjoyed it, even the first time I saw it, because I find it an impossible spectacle to engage with on any level. First of all, I just don't find it interesting to look at. Secondly, I never get any sense of what is actually taking place, because I don't know what if one character throws a CGI energy ball at another character and it strikes them. Even the best actor in the world can do their best to convey some sense of pain or anguish. It does nothing to communicate to me in that scenario exactly what damage has been done, because I don't know what it means.
How many hit points did she lose when she...
Right, exactly. I've just got no way of being able to gauge what it is that's going down. I mean, who's even winning? I don't know. I'll never have any way of knowing.
Craig, I would assume that the damage that she takes each time is 3d4 plus 3, because it looks like a magic missile to me.
First of all, gay. Second of all, stupid.
What got me, though, for this, what stopped me from going, ugh, completely about this, though, was understanding that she's throwing all this light show at Agatha just to lull her into the, oh, you've got all my magic now, just so that she could be like, haha, you don't, come down here, I'm going to wipe your memory, blah blah blah. So in retrospect, I didn't mind it that much, but at the time I was like, I want to see more weird whip things of 40 Wandas and time loops.
They're really frustrating. Right, see, that kind of stuff, they had a major opportunity to be way more inventive with. We are talking about a character here who literally has the power to manipulate reality. She has spent this entire show maintaining the illusion of a sitcom universe. If she can do that for 9 episodes, why can't she, for 5 minutes in a battle, really get inventive with warping the reality around her enemy? Maybe they could chase each other through an endlessly warping version of an amalgam of all the sitcom scenarios. Even that, something as simple as that, would have been fun, but none of that happened. Literally nothing happened. I don't even know what it was I saw, apart from the usual, here's a ball of energy, here's one back, or here's one back at you, and I'm like, come on, man, this is not a battle. This isn't anything.
Do you remember the whole thing about the secret 10th episode? The internet rumour, and how someone supposedly saw that there was
is it not a making of or something?
Well, the thing is, they're alleged, according to Matt Shackman, the show was originally 10 episodes.
Oh.
But they kind of collapsed 3 episodes into 2 at one point. Kind of like a reverse Fargo season 4.
Right.
Because Shackman thought that, in terms of pacing, it made more sense to lose a full episode so it wouldn't drag out as much. But he said they lost some other stuff they'd shot for the finale. There was a whole bit where Studio Scratches turned into a demon and stuff. He said that all get cut.
This is interesting. We've got an example of a show that spread itself out in Fargo to try and get over this problem and still failed, even though I enjoyed that season. And then we've got an example here of a show that did the opposite, and I would say still failed.
The lesson here appears to be, stick to your schedule.
Can I be honest? I think there's another bigger lesson, and I'm not just saying this because I have an obvious bias in this area, but you need to give the writers more time and maybe encourage them a bit more, give them more stimulus, maybe pay them better. I don't know how much these writers are getting paid, but
I'm assuming
honestly,
that Jack Schaefer's getting a few bob for this.
Yeah, probably, but a lot of my flaws in this do come down to the writing, I'm afraid. I feel like that's where the root of it is. I mean, there are definitely other flaws on the production side, for sure, and the post-production side even. But I think the root of all this is, if you have a good script, you're going to have way fewer of these problems.
Shackman also did say that they were running it almost like a week-to-week show, where that finale was not ready, but when they started broadcasting. And originally, the plan was to broadcast the first 3 episodes back-to-back rather than the first 2, which I think would have solved a lot of people's initial problems with the show, because
Maybe.
that would have meant that the first sort of bit of WandaVision would have ended with the reveal of the sword base outside.
Yeah, there was a lot of people that were quite impatient with who just weren't digging really the old school sitcom format, because we weren't, at that point in the early episodes, we weren't getting anything really outside of it.
Yeah.
I actually saw there's a channel on YouTube called Mild Fuzz that I sometimes watch, and it's usually 2 guys who cover TV shows. One of them bailed out, I think, after the 3rd episode because he was not digging it, and then the other guy that was left when it came to the 4th episode was like, man, you really needed to stick around for this episode. But he never came back, so I guess he was not convinced.
Fair play. But yeah, so apparently there was had they done the 3 episodes at first, Matt Shackman says they wouldn't have had the finale finished in time to broadcast. Again, this scheduling apparently a lot to do with COVID shutdowns and stuff as well, delaying things.
Sure. I bet that definitely did not help, obviously. Yeah.
To be fair, I wouldn't have known that a lot of the problems that you're going to talk about, or that we're talking about right now, maybe not all the ones you're going to talk about, but were caused specifically by scheduling issues, unless I'd seen that interview.
No.
But again, I wouldn't have known that Fargo had those couple of dodgy episodes if I hadn't known about it. So, you know, maybe sometimes it's best not to know how the sausage is made.
Right, exactly. And I guess this is
just eat the sausage. Hashtag eat the sausage.
Get it, don't you? But yeah, that is one of the problems. As much as I've defended this era of social media and how we receive this stuff, one of the problems is that we end up knowing too much a lot of the time. And I don't think there's any cure for that, because I know for a fact I'm not one of those people who's obsessive, but there's people out there way more obsessive about this than me. But nonetheless, and I know you will as well, I do find myself just sometimes looking shit up that I want to know about a show. Depends on the show. If I'm really into a show, I want to know less about it. But certain shows I just get curious about, and I think, I'm going to look that up, and it's easy to find stuff out now in a way that, you know, even just 20 years ago was next to impossible.
Yep, for sure. We've had the starter, let's get into the main. Thoughts on the finale? I believe you have one or two.
Yeah, I do. So I have some issues with this show generally now, in the context of it being a complete text now that I've seen the finale. It's frustrating because the superpowered comedy aspect of it was a really fantastic vehicle for exploring the subject of grief in quite a subversive way, potentially. And not just Wanda's grief, but we also got tastes of it with Monica as well, which is why the way the show deals with Monica later is criminal in my view, and I'll come to that in a bit. Here is where I ultimately land on this show, and it's not going to sound kind, and some people might think I'm going a bit overboard. I'm going to try and explain myself as best I can, though. I think this show ultimately is kind of reactionary, as well as lazy, but the former is maybe a bigger problem. Unfortunately, I think Wanda in this show is ultimately made into a Karen and a severe narcissist, and I don't think the show,
Karen.
I don't think the show does anything to reckon with that properly. It actually tries to make us sympathise with her far too much. Now, I don't want it to sound all pearl clutchy, but the treatment of Wanda as a quote-unquote flawed hero archetype, I think is pretty hideous in some ways. As Special Agent Dale Cooper would say, I doubt any of us has as a stranger to grief, take a drink. But as someone who suffered both grief and also trauma at the hands of a manipulative narcissist, I've got a perspective on both sides of Wanda's story. And I'm not saying I'm unique in any way. There's be plenty of people who will be able to say the same thing. And ultimately, I come down on the side of feeling that this show kind of fell a bit too much in love with the idea of Wanda as a victim and not nearly enough with the idea of interrogating the consequences of her being a victimizer. And that's something that left me feeling a bit disturbed, and not in any cool meta way that the show was intending. There is also this troubling trope that we've touched on before in previous episodes of powerful women who are unable to deal with their trauma and therefore end up inflicting it on everyone else. First of all, why is it always women? And it's a weird trope that exists when, as we've discussed before, if you look at human history, men are way more susceptible to that kind of behaviour than women, historically speaking. Now, unfortunately, I think this show doubles down on that in its final moments instead of doing anything particularly relevant to critique or deconstruct that trope. So that's my general feelings. Should I just dig into the detail just now?
I'll say I don't disagree particularly with anything you've said, for sure. I found that the way I'm wondering if it was a scheduling thing or whatever, but the way like Monica's last half an episode was a bit like, the line that Monica says of, they'll never know how much you sacrificed for them, was like, yeah, but...
I have serious problems with that. I tell you what, I'm going to get the less intensive things out first, and then I'll come to that, right? Because I've got a note here, as you were talking about the battle between Agatha and Wanda. I've got some notes here on that I just wanted to get out of the way, so I'll deal with that first because it's a little less heavy. As you said, of course there was always going to be a final battle. It's the MCU, that's what happens. And as I've said, I just at least expected the battle we got to reflect the inventiveness of the series prior, and it didn't really do that. Although the Vision battle more than served up on that score. I really do wish there'd just been a less fighty and more surreal, warpy battle. Now here's the thing about this, and I think it can maybe be a bit of a complex issue. I saw some people online comment about this, and I completely get it. Some people, I think particularly a lot of female viewers, are more than happy to see two female characters in the MCU finally just slug it out because they get to see that so rarely. And I think that's an entirely legitimate point of view, and nothing I'm saying here is meant to undermine that in any way. I totally get it. I completely understand the need to have the women do battle the way the men do, as they should be allowed to. But I think my problem is, it shouldn't be on the shoulders of this one particular show to deliver that, just because the MCU has done such a bad job previously of highlighting the women in that kind of battle scenario. I mean, you can be 100% sure we're going to get more of the same usual wisecracks and kicky, punchy action in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series that's about to start imminently. So I don't know why we need more of that kind of straight-ahead action here, really, when it could have been done in a way more compelling and character-appropriate way. I do think there's just a problem with we've been served up so little in terms of the women characters being able to do interesting stuff, that unfortunately for Wandavision it has had to carry the weight of, oh well, now finally we get to do a battle, so we better just do an old-fashioned battle, when in fact that was maybe the least appropriate thing for this show. Basically what I'm saying is the MCU needs to buck up and let each of these properties be its own thing to its own maximum potential.
Its own Maximoff potential, if you will.
Its own Maximoff potential, the Agatha thing, now I've hinted at this already. Agatha is ultimately just a cookie-cutter pantomime villain, and I've said already, the reveal made her infinitely less interesting to me, and I honestly felt all the magic kind of started to go out of Catherine Hahn's performance from that point, because her character thereafter was just so utterly generic, right down to the costume I was not thrilled about. I think it's interesting that her performance is never really all that enthralling again until the moment at the end when she's cursed by Wanda to remain in Westview, where you can see, if you really are looking at it, you can see horror lurking behind Catherine Hahn's eyes. That is acting. That was superb. And I genuinely found that chilling. But unfortunately, what that did was hammer home the idea that Wanda is a fucking monster. By the way, that's the other thing as well. I didn't make a note about this, but it's occurring to me now as I'm thinking about it. This whole thing about leaving Agatha in Westview, surrounded by all these people who have already been traumatized, who now recognize Agatha as one of the witches. How does that go down in Westview from here on in? That's a weird thing to think about.
According to Matt Shackman, that can be summarised in one sentence of "not my problem," because he was asked by, I think it was Mark Bernardin, asked him, what's it like when you sign on with Marvel and you have these certain properties that are pre-existing or that will be used in other things? Do they give you like a blueprint and say this has to be this and this character has to be X and X has to be it has to end in this, and this is where everyone has to be by the end of your product so that we can go into the next one? And according to him, it's not like that. They get given a rough outline, but the creatives have the freedom to do what they want, and then it's up to the next person who's going to use those characters to develop certain elements.
Okay, well, that's interesting you say that, because that leaves me with a bigger problem with this show than I already had. And I'll come to that in a minute. Let me just get a couple other smaller things out of the way first before I go into the real meat of my biggest problem with the show. So another not as big problem, but a problem nonetheless. So as I said earlier, I did not have any problem with the fact that the fan theories didn't go anywhere. That's fine. I don't care about that. The only thing for me that really, really bothers me, and I think you know where
I know where you're going with this,
is the stunt casting of Evan Peters, which, even though he was great, and he's an amazing actor, I've never seen him give a bad performance in anything. He's always good. He even makes later seasons of American Horror Story watchable. But that was stunt casting pure and simple, and it really strikes me as a cynical move by the makers of the show and by the MCU generally, designed to provoke exactly the kind of obsessive speculation that they're now pretending they didn't want to provoke. And I think the cynicism of that is kind of unforgivable. That dick joke that it ended up in was neither cute nor funny, and it wasn't not funny in a subversive way either, just a really dull, reactionary way that I think actually expressed contempt for the audience.
Well, Craig, I'm sorry, but when one understands the joke, it is in fact fitting completely with the themes of WandaVision, because Boner is the name of a character from the sitcom Growing Pains, and there's more. Matt Shackman was a child actor on Growing Pains. So it was referencing an in-universe sitcom being a little bit fourth wall breaky, as they had done recently. And hey, it was Ralph.
Can I just say, what that is doing is putting a hat on a dick joke. It doesn't excuse the dick joke. And it certainly does not excuse the stunt casting. So, boo-orns to that. I'll admit I did not get the reference. If that's the reference in there, okay, cool. But I don't know that it does anything to dispel any of the criticisms I just made.
You've got to take the dick joke problem up with the writers of Growing Pains.
It's just a dick joke. Don't take it so hard, Woodsy, is what you're saying. What I will say on a positive side to this, that's slightly related, I did find Paul Bettany's trolling top-notch when he said that in the finale there would be an actor appearing that he got to share screen time with, that he was honoured to share screen time with.
That was great.
And it turned out he was talking about himself.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
That was pretty great.
Hey, I'm in agreement. I think I'm sad that Evan Peters was just a Bismarck, you know. He was a red herring. But he was so good in the role that...
He was great. But there was no need for that role to have been stunt casted the way it was. It was bullshit. And I'm not digging it.
Worst episode ever.
I would have felt more annoyed by that if Marvel hadn't already announced they were doing X-Men.
True, but still. You cannot cast Evan Peters in this role and then pretend you were not interested in stirring up people coming up with all kinds of exotic theories.
I'm sure there was definitely an element of that.
Alright, moving on. One last thing before I really get to the things that are the problematic things for me. The emotional aspect of the ending, or as I've written it here in quotes, emotional. This whole thing about... Now, I've seen a lot of people say they found that final scene between Wanda and Vision very touching. I came away from it feeling very cold. This whole thing about them finding each other again, yada yada, we already found each other once, etc., etc., strikes me as utterly empty. And it's one of the reasons why I feel disengaged from the MCU generally, because there really are not much in the way of long-standing consequences in the MCU, much in the same way as there is not in the Marvel comics themselves. Nothing is really permanent. The same way the comics can be rebooted on a continuous basis, there's no reason why characters cannot be rebooted in this franchise. In fact, just this week, there's talk that Chris Evans may return as Captain America.
What?
It's got me wrong. I absolutely love Chris Evans as Captain America, so I'd be happy if he did. But it hammers home the point that nothing is permanent.
Yeah, we know from comics, no one dies for long. People will come back as long as writers decide they need that character.
It's just bizarre to me. I mean, maybe it's me who's at fault here, right? I don't know. But I find it difficult to understand why. And I do not mean this in a judgmental way. I honestly don't. I just mean it literally what I'm saying. I don't understand it. I don't understand how grown adults can get invested in a fictional universe where ultimately there are no consequences. That feels weird to me. It seems like that's a universe built for children. Because when you're a child, you live in a perpetual present anyway. And so that's just about the only fictional universe you can relate to. I feel like for any story to have meaning, it has to have consequences, because that's what makes being a human being meaningful and also terrifying and also beautiful all at the same time. And I think when you strip a story of those things... they could not have signposted it any harder when these two characters saying to each other, "Oh, we found each other before. There's every chance we can find each other again." And I'm like, yeah, you can, because that's how this universe works. And so therefore, I don't know why I'm ever supposed to be invested in any of your fates. I guess I'm not. But if it's bringing people joy, I'm not here to bring those people down, because this is not one of my major problems with the show. It's just something that I'm like, I feel very alienated from this. Other people... Tons of you out there clearly really dig this stuff, and more power to you, but I find it really difficult to relate to.
I do feel like a permanency in death in fiction gives the action more meaning, for sure. But on the other hand, I think I'm a little more open to accepting for what it is, pure on very kind of face value than you are. I'm just like, yeah, I'll get into it. I know he's probably not dead, but I'll still go like, no!
I can accept it on face value, but I think my point is, in order to do so, I have to forget everything I know about how the world works, and I just find that a bit weird. I do feel like these things are made for children, and that's fine. Children should enjoy this stuff. I just don't understand why so many adults are so invested in it. Again, I'm not being a killjoy. By all means, people, please continue to enjoy it. Don't. I mean, you're not going to listen to me anyway, right? So it's fine. None of us are losing anything here. I'm just saying I just find it puzzling. It seems... I'm not going to get all Alan Moore about it, who gets very angry about the fact that people seem to enjoy these stories. But there just comes a point where I'm like, I can't take this leap where it just keeps continuously telling me that there are no long-term consequences. At some point, I have to bail out.
I'm just waiting on Alan Moore's exact same take as you to come out, though.
Yeah, just make sure everybody knows I said it on this podcast first.
Now we have recorded proof. Screw you, Alan Moore, you idea stealing bitch.
That's a reference to the fact that Alan Moore definitely did not, Your Honour, steal ideas from me, published in my novel Red Shift Over Badtown, which you can buy from wherever good books are sold. #blog. Okay, so I'm going to get into the meat of my major problems with this finale finally. I think we've waffled around enough. I'll try not and make this into a rant, because I don't want this to go on too long.
Spoiler alert, unsurprisingly it does.
And like I say, I don't want to ruin anybody's fun. I'm not suggesting...
All right, White Vision.
Woodsy so White Vision. As we've said in previous episodes, there was plenty in this show to enjoy, so I don't want people to think that I'm just pure shiting on everything in the show. That's not what I'm doing. I don't know that I'll ever be able to rewatch this show because of my problems with the finale, but I don't regret watching it. It was a really, really fun ride. It was just a shame about the destination, ultimately. But that's just me. If you love this show, I'm not telling you shouldn't. I'm just saying... There are certain things I think need to be talked about that I think are really problematic about it. So I'm going to start my problems with Monica and how she was treated, because I have a big problem with this. It seems to me that Monica's entire purpose in the finale is to peel out that dick joke behind the cynical stunt casting and then literally disappear for a good while before she then reappears as a human shield taking bullets from a white madman to protect the children of the white super Karen responsible for this entire scenario. Which, by the way, when will society finally reckon with the endemic problem of white-on-white violence? But the optics of this are entirely fucked up, and honestly, I feel they're problematic AF. Like, having a black woman in there to literally save the white kids of the white... Let's be honest, she's not really a hero. I think she's a monster, to be quite honest. All of this just... it really made my skin crawl when it happened. And it maybe would not have bothered me as much if Monica had had a little more to do thereafter. She did not. And all of that really leaves me feeling a bit queasy. To recap Monica, as far as this show goes, her entire origin, really, when you think about it, is she owes her superpowers to Wanda, which could have been fine had there been other super origins caused by the same thing. Like if other people had walked away with superpowers. Now, maybe somewhere down the line it might be established that other people did. I don't know. But in the self-contained story within the show that we were given, I just feel it's a bit... This one black woman owes her superpowers to the crazy Karen. I just find a bit... I'm not digging it, man. Here's the crux of this, right? Monica's entire thing, the reason why she's there, is because she persevered in trying to save Wanda from being used as a military weapon. And she was the one who always believed that Wanda was never as bad as she seemed. And she ultimately is the one who kind of absolves Wanda of the responsibility for her crimes. Like, she essentially says to Wanda at the end, they don't understand your pain. This, she says, of the people that Wanda has psychologically imprisoned and tortured for however long it's been.
Who, to be fair, literally say the words, your grief is poison.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, the show even tries to hint at is how horrifying this is. I do feel there was a great opportunity here for Monica to have had more of a journey and to have realised the flaws in her own mission. And instead of trying to save Wanda, at some point her mission changes and she realises she has to instead be a voice for the people of Westview, who, by the way, other than the occasional scream about how much pain they're in, are never really given a voice in this entire story, which is kind of unforgivable. Now, particularly given Monica's own past with grief, she could have been a really great oppositional foil for Wanda to point out that grief is no excuse for victimising others. You know, that could have been a really interesting conversation. It could have been a really interesting oppositional set piece. Mm-hmm. Instead, they ultimately just make Monica Wanda's enabler at the end, and I think that's fucking awful. Also, this postscript that Monica gets really bothered me, because it basically tells us that Monica wasn't fit to have a major role in this show. You know, it's like, sorry, but you've been relegated to this other show that's taking place, or this other thing that's happening. I mean, if she's a powerful character going forward, which it seems like she's going to be, which, fair enough, but why can't she be more prominent here? Why is that a problem? I mean, the fact also is a Black Sword agent who reveals herself as a Skrull and who reveals to Monica that she used to be kind of transferred to the secret People of Colour show that's taking place separately from the main plot. It's like the segregated superheroes are over here. All of that stuff just really set me on edge. And I know for a fact there's people who hear people like me say stuff like this, think, oh, you're reading too much into it. I guarantee everybody who says that is white. Are there any other black women in this show besides Monica's mother who dies? I can't think of a single one.
The quote-unquote aerospace engineer.
Oh yeah, you're quite right. Okay, so there was another one, right. So the aerospace engineer who was Monica's friend, and so therefore you could argue was also part of the segregated side story. This is not shaping up great. I mean, I'm totally aware of the larger context of Captain Marvel, etc., and wherever they might take Monica's character. That does not make the optics of the staging of this any less troubling, I don't think. And so here's the problem with this for a lot of people, I think. I think there's a lot of people who think racism is something that's conscious and vocal, and that racism is just relegated to things like saying the N-word and, at the low end and burning crosses at the far end. The problem with racism is, for a lot of people who don't understand what it is, they think it has to be malicious in order to be racism. Racism often works unconsciously, and I'm just going to call out this show for being racist, because the treatment here of these characters, it's just got it written all over it. it's not conscious, malicious racism, but it's unconscious racism. And this shit has been happening in popular culture since the dawn of popular culture. So, yeah, I was not thrilled with any of that shit. The other thing, I touched on already, so Agatha cursed to be a nosy neighbour, right? That is an act of pure evil by Wanda. Now, I'm not saying Agatha deserves not to be punished in some way, although I say that, again, with the caveat that I don't really know, because I know nothing about Agatha, really, because the show did not do anything to tell us about her, other than, oh, by the way, she's a wrong-un. But it's an act of pure evil, not just on Agatha, but on the townspeople. Because as I was trying to say earlier, like, how does life now play out for the traumatised people of Westview? What is this? I mean, this is creepy, psychotic shit. And I don't understand why Monica is cool with it. Like, she just stands there and watches Wanda do it. Like, why? Wanda clearly needs to be stopped. Like, where are the consequences? Why does she still just get to mete out her own warped idea of justice after everything she's done? Like, to paraphrase Jesse Pinkman, who was referring to another legendary narcissist, she can't keep getting away with it.
I've heard parallels being made to the way this show ended, to the way Legion ended, in that an abuser gets away with it without ever apologising.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think that this ending was better.
Oof, really?
Because, wait for it, because there was no Pink Floyd.
Well, at that point, I'm not going to argue.
And I think if you think that Legion did it better, then what you're saying is you definitely love Pink Floyd. And that's
the only
band.
Explanation. Well, I love Pink Floyd as long as it's Stephanie Corneliuson singing it.
More on her later.
Indeed. Here's like one of my memorable lines I think that I'll take with me from this finale. Kids, handle the military. Wanda is a bad parent, man. She is the true villain of the show, and the worst kind, and it's largely through flawed writing, probably. But we are directed to sympathise with her, and it's without, ever really her reckoning with the weight of her crimes. I mean, she's a far worse villain than Agatha or even Hayward, because both of those characters are nothing more than ciphers, really. When Hayward particularly is a cipher, he is such a cookie-cutter villain. It's, and that's fine. That's all he was there to serve in the story. I'm not particularly annoyed about that. But we've no context to judge either of those characters very much, really, because they are just ciphers. It's almost like an impulsive thing, and we go, haha, they got their comeuppance. But really, when you think about it, particularly in Agatha's case, it's so extremely smudged, because her attempts to relate with Wanda in that battle, when she mentions always ends up in pitchforks for women like us, is completely false, because she was punished by other witches. She wasn't actually punished by people with pitchforks, as far as we know. So that being the one attempt to get, first of all, an interesting angle on the opposition between the two characters, but also an angle on how Wanda might feel about herself, is kind of ends up just being meaningless, because we know that's not true for Agatha, so it doesn't really mean anything. The fundamental point about Wanda is she's an extreme narcissist who just uses her own grief to excuse or at least deny to herself the extent of her crimes. And this is why that line from Monica that she would do the same thing, by the way, is maybe the most hideous line in the whole thing, because is that the message that grieving people just, cannot be expected to know the difference between right and wrong? That the extent of Wanda's crimes is somehow all cool because super being's gonna superpower. What you gonna do? Because fuck that shit, man. She should not get to walk away from this.
When Monica says, they'll never understand what you gave up, and in your position I'd have done the same. In my head canon, I think Monica's like, you ever been in a situation where you're with someone who's fucking mental and like scary, and you just kind of want them out of the room, and they start coming out with mad shit, and you're like, oh yeah, definitely, yeah, and you go, aye, okay, right, bye. I feel like that's what Monica's doing.
I saw someone online make that same theory, but the problem with that is it doesn't make Monica any less of an enabler, especially now since she has superpowers herself, so that would be weak sauce. Yeah, so Wanda should not get to walk away from this, and Monica really should have really been the last person to enable this. I mean, the fact that she didn't basically means that Monica ultimately had no character arc in this story, because she sticks to her mission of saving Wanda, despite Wanda being a monster who should not have been saved. I mean, what she should have done is take Wanda down in some way. That would have been an interesting twist in the finale. That would have been a satisfying conclusion, I think. I mean, and I don't mean take her down in any extreme way necessarily. Even if it was just Wanda agreeing to surrender herself to custody, that would have been fine. There was a real wasted opportunity here to explore the conflicting effects of grief. And given how committed they seem to be early in the show about that being their overriding theme, they really dropped a bollock on this one. They instead chose to create a narrative that actually just legitimizes and excuses the worst aspects of a narcissistic personality. And in this case, specifically a white personality, and they used a black woman to provide that legitimacy, which I think is fucking gross. I've seen people say that Wanda doesn't walk free because she's had to sacrifice her husband and kids. Now, for me, and I say this as someone on the pretty far left of the political spectrum, so I don't think carceral punishment is necessarily a legitimate phenomenon, and I think there are definitely healthier ways a society can deal with transgressions that are rooted more in rehabilitation and much less in revenge, and which take into consideration empathy, or at least an understanding of a perpetrator's circumstances. So I'm not necessarily saying that I want to see Wanda locked up or burned at the stake. That's not what I'm saying. But bearing in mind, we are dealing with the MCU, in which there is a rigid real world aspect of established law and order that's kind of regarded as an unassailable virtue within that universe, then redress by the laws of that land are more or less all we have to deal with characters. So I think Wanda surrendering herself into custody would have been the right move. I don't think that grief and trauma excuse like mass and possibly irreparable harm to other people, and I think it's a really grim message that this show kind of just waves it off. There's an entire town of people who are now psychologically damaged because of her actions, and furthermore, I kind of segued off there, but the fact that the thing about people saying she didn't walk free because of her own further trauma about her husband and kids that she effectively sacrificed, well, the husband and kids that Wanda lost, as well as being not really lost in this universe where the status quo will always prevail, as I previously discussed, this family were also basically kind of animated mannequins that she constructed from the ether through which, you know, to exercise her own original trauma. I mean, that was the entire impetus. So, I mean, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of dissecting how long were these kids even alive, etc. I mean, that's not what the road I want to go down. But it was a period during which she did all she could to manipulate every facet of Vision's and her children's existence to her own will. And we're supposed to accept that the loss of that scenario is somehow comparable to the psychological damage she's inflicted on this entire town of people whom the show treats as kind of non-playable characters, whose only purpose in the end is just to give Wanda dirty looks, just so that she can feel like a tortured pariah. Get the fuck out of here, man. We've talked before, actually, in reference to other shows and texts. In fact, you brought it up early, particularly Lovecraft Country, about the theme of the oppressed becoming oppressors. It's a great theme. It's also a really rewarding theme to explore, I think, and a lot of shows, a lot of novels, a lot of movies have gotten great mileage out of it. That's essentially what happens to Wanda in this story. I mean, the fact that Wanda has just oppressed an entire town, and the makers of the show seem to have given no regard to how many future oppressors she might have created, is some unforgivably weak sauce. I mean, given the overriding themes of the show, it seems at least awfully negligent that that's not even brought up in the conversation. I mean, converse to a lot of predictions, Wanda did not go on to create the mutants. She didn't create the X-Men.
I mean,
she
we
actually
don't know that yet.
Well, we don't know that yet, but what she has actually created here in Westview is Twin Peaks. Because with the amount of Garmonbosia she's manifested in this town, Killer Bob will be like a pig in shit who'll be pigging out in bigger style than me in lockdown. David Lynch's Westview, that's the real unrecorded night. Or in the case of this finale, unrecorded shite, more like.
Westview the Return. It's going to happen in 25 years.
But to sum up, the idea that Wanda cannot face consequences right now because they need Wanda, the MCU needs Wanda as a chess piece to play in Doctor Strange and on, is horseshit as far as I'm concerned. There's really no reason they cannot have some kind of reckoning here in this show and still have her be a player in that movie. We're dealing with superpowered beings. Like, anything can go if you just use your imagination. And as you confirmed earlier, it turns out that the makers of this show were kind of free to do whatever they liked with Wanda at the end of the show. So they are to blame for this weak sauce ending. And though there are many pieces of evidence in this finale that the imagination in the MCU is perhaps not as abundant as it should be, so maybe they don't have as much imagination as they should.
Sam Raimi is also partially to blame because Matt Shackman had a lot of meetings with Sam Raimi towards the end of shooting about the two things mixing into each other, so hashtag blame Raimi.
More like Sam Blamey.
Not Rami, more on him later.
Not Rami. No beef with Rami. But yeah, the story ends with no real consequence for Wanda, I would argue, beyond the aforementioned destruction of all the things she created in the first place in an act of pure narcissism, and which will ultimately have the aforementioned lack of meaning in the long run, is deeply irresponsible at best, deliberately celebratory of the kind of damaged hero bullshit archetype at worst, and which, at its core, I just think is really reactionary, and I don't dig it, in case you didn't get it, so that's that. I think there was an opportunity here to create something way better in this finale that also would have been less problematic, and ultimately they fumbled the ball and they squandered it. More like Wandavision.
I conversely enjoyed how they left it without Wanda having any real punishment. It was end of Infinity War.
But that's not what happens, though. We're told that the good guy does win. The show entirely treats Wanda as the good guy at the end of the show.
Do they, though? Because it's pretty obvious that she's not.
100% it does. Because when she's walking out there with the villagers glaring at her, we're supposed to feel sorry for her. We're 100% seeing that from her point of view. And Monica was supposed to be our moral compass in this show. That was the role this show cast her as earlier in this show, because she's the one fighting against Hayward, saying no, we should give her a chance, etc, etc. She should be the one to have the responsibility to say, no, actually, you're a fucking wrong un. And they did not do that. They had the moral compass take the side of Wanda, and the only conclusion to draw from that is that they want the audience to side with Wanda.
See, I agree that Monica should have been like, look at what you've done, but I do enjoy, the bit when townspeople are just like, what the fuck have you just done? And she's like, shut up, and starts throttling them all with her mind.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that. I was like, she is such a wrong un. She's not a good guy. She's like Christian Slater, more on him later, good rhyme. And True Romance, when he's talking about Sonny Chiba, she's not so much a good guy as a bad motherfucker.
Right.
I'm a sucker for that character trope. What can I say?
Well, but that's part of my problem. I think culturally we're all a bit obsessed with that character type, despite it being extremely unhealthy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to be all pearl clutchy about this, because that is not where I'm coming from at this. I just think. Well, I've already explained it. I'm just going to be repeating myself. I did start this rant by saying I didn't want it to be a rant. So, I mean, I'm just going to be reiterating what I've said already. I think you get the point.
I do. You've not made any points that I necessarily disagree with.
Here's the thing. I will also admit a certain responsibility. Maybe I'm expecting stuff from this show that I should not have been expecting, and I wholly take on board that that's a possibility. It's ironic, though, because as we discussed before, I'd already been kind of out on the MCU due to exhaustion, and it took me a long time to get round to eventually watching the most recent two movies, which were Peter Parker's entirely unremarkable European vacation and Brie Larson's 2-hour recruitment ad for the US Air Force. And I wasn't particularly impressed with either of those. This show, in its early episodes, or for most of its run, actually, drew me back into a place. And I remember saying it on this podcast, where I was having so much fun that I was starting to get quite invested in these characters, and I was like, yeah, maybe I could get drawn back into this. But after the ending, I'm sorry to say, I've now done a complete 180, and I'm back to not giving a solitary shit about this entire franchise.
Aha, fool you once, shame on you.
Aha, I still got your 9 hours of time, you'll never get them back. Mickey Mouse is the true villain.
Yep. The scarlet shorts.
Alright, well that's me. I'm all Wandavisioned out. I hope not too many people hate me after all the ranting I did there. I hope it wasn't too excessive. But sometimes shit just needs to be said.
I'll wrap up by saying I really enjoyed it. What would you give the series as a whole out of 9? How many 5s?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is it's hard for me to think about the entire series now without the context of the finale. I think if you'd asked me this question like 3 episodes ago, I would have been quite happy to have said somewhere in the region of 7.5, 8 5s out of 9. In the context of the finale, it's just left me with such a deflated, unpleasant feeling for the reasons just discussed, that I'm actually going to give it 5 5s out of 9.
5 5s out of 9. You heard it here first, cats.
I can guarantee that it's the first time anyone has heard that rating about anything.
I'm going to go ahead and give WandaVision 8 5s out of 9. I loved that, and I will rewatch it. But as I have also previously mentioned in the podcast, unlike yourself, Marvel have got me on the hook, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, I want to
that mouse has got you good.
I'm going to watch the shit out of Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'm going to watch Loki.
For a moment there, I thought you said Foghorn and Winter Soldier, and I was like, Foghorn Leghorn is not a Disney character, so that's your first mistake.
Foghorn Leghorn and the Winter Soldier is a show I would watch, though.
Oh, you do declare? Please tell me how much you do declare.
Well, I do. Thanks for sticking with us for the WandaVision chat, if you have.
Yeah, so shock revelations all around there. We hope you all recover.
Leave us a comment, let us know what you thought.
And please be gentle.
In life, in general, please be gentle.
Yeah, just generally. Treat each other with respect.
We've scored the TV show, but we've yet to score the memes.
This show sure spawned a lot of them, and many of them were just delicious.
The memes for this show get a solid 9 5s out of 9 from me. My personal favourite, and quite a recent one as well, was the Wanda and Vision being interviewed by Oprah.
Yeah, that's a new addition, which was quite fun in the wake of the whole Harry and Meghan shenanigans. That did get some lols out of me.
I enjoyed the multitude of uses for the picture of Catherine Hahn's Agatha Harkness winking.
Yeah. Some of those have been pretty great.
An excellent new template.
One I did thoroughly enjoy was for you David Lynch fans out there. It was the screenshot of the White Vision saying, "I request elaboration," and then the next panel was just a picture of David Lynch from that famous interview where he refuses to elaborate on Eraserhead being his most spiritual movie. Also, like the one of Wanda and Vision in the car being the ones responsible for knocking down the little boy in Twin Peaks: The Return. There are some wonderful sick people out there on the internet. Oh, I've just remembered my very favourite one. It was just after the reveal about Agatha, and at the end of the song where she says, "And I killed Sparky too." Press F for Sparky, by the way. There was that meme where it's the quite famous picture of the guy by the grave flipping the 2 fingers at the camera, but it was Agatha's face over Sparky's grave. And I did actually make that my profile picture for a while because I loved it so much.
And I Killed Sparky too got a lot of different "and I somethinged too"
yes, yeah.
over them.
There was a lot of Twin Peaks related versions of that one, such as "and I also wrote the James and Evelyn subplot."
I made a meme which was the 2 guys on the moon looking at the Earth, the 2 astronauts.
Yes.
At one point in the gun, there always has been, which was simply one of them saying it was Agatha.
I was stunned that no one had done that. You got ahead of the game on that one.
Speaking of Agatha all along, another one of my favourite things about the show is that song got Catherine Hahn to number 1 in the iTunes charts.
Yeah, beautiful development.
Amazing. Number
So much
1
fun.
artist, Catherine Hahn.
And the song is like a minute long. It's absolutely fantastic. It's made for an audience with an extremely short attention span.
But speaking of number 1s, in the iTunes chart, another thing that happened recently, unrelated to WandaVision, Glasgow post-rockers Mogwai got to number 1 in the UK
Never heard
album
of them.
charts. After 25 years after the release of their first ever single on their own record label, new album on their own record label, was the number 1 album in the UK album charts. So, good job, lads. They beat the Foo Fighters.
Yeah, and that's all that matters, right? I went through a small roller coaster during that because I'll be honest, unless you're playing the drum kit for them, James, I'm not particularly interested in the music of Mogwai. I have a nostalgic affection for the first couple of records just because of the time and place I was in at the time, and that those records were just everywhere amongst everybody I was hanging out with at the time. But they're not really my bag. They're not really my bag, to be honest. But I also have the capacity to wish them well on this. Go Glasgow. And any band that you've played in, James, you always make them better.
Aw, F Sublushity over here.
F Kissacity.
They were congratulated by Getz, who was almost number 1,
I saw that, and that's where my small roller coaster came in, because like that Gets album is seriously good. And I was
great.
like, as much as I wish Mogwai well on this, I'd be quite happy for Gets to win. But he was very gracious in the handing over of the baton.
Yep, and he did ride around London in an armoured car. But he's got that Warner Records money, so he can afford an armoured car.
That's true. It's true. He's in the big time now.
Yep.
All right, so after that long journey through a show that really did its best, or arguably its worst, to explore the theme of grief, I think it's time we go and drown our own grief at the bar.
Sounds like a plan. We'll be right back after these messages.
My round?
I think so.
Seems to be always my round.
That's how I plan it.
Oh, damn it. You can't keep getting away with it. James, what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, Craig, I am drinking an old favourite. Well, I say old favourite, I think I've drank it once while we've been doing the podcast. Estevez Pinot Noir.
Oh, Emilio's.
Yes. A wine of Chile.
Well, I'm sort of joining you on that. I am drinking Concha y Toro Pinot Noir, also from Chile. It is sumptuous. It's really beautiful. I highly recommend it.
We're both not only on Pinot Noir, but we're both on Chilean Pinot Noir.
What are the odds? Turns out they're pretty high.
I think I'm high!
Alright, so before we get to the Mr. Robot business, wee bit of bar chat, James, wee bit of bar chat. What have you been up to and how have you been?
Well, I've been not bad, Craig, and what I've been up to, I've been doing a catch-up on certain television shows that I've missed of late. To be specific...
You finally got round to watching Ringer. For the listeners' benefit, this is a running joke where I a long time ago recommended the god-awful Sarah Michelle Gellar show Ringer to James on the basis that he's a big Sarah Michelle Gellar fan but has never seen that show. But that show is so bad it's wonderful.
And it's impossible to find on the internet.
It's the Ark of the Covenant of bad TV shows.
I've been doing me a catch-up on the TV shows Euphoria and I May Destroy You.
Oh, excellent. That's a double bill of depression and anxiety and also lols.
Yeah, so Sarah and myself have been watching it on Monday nights. We watch an episode of Euphoria and then an episode of I May Destroy You, which is maybe not the wisest combo.
Going through a rough time, are we?
Yeah. So
everything all right at home?
For the benefit of the listener, Sarah, my significant other, my much better half, lives in Dublin, and I live in just outside Glasgow. So, you know, during the pandemic, obviously, with it being worse, we're very far apart and can't see each other, so we have Skype TV dates, and what we've done is we've decided to watch two of the most harrowing shows I've ever seen back to back on Monday nights.
To be fair though, they are two of the most harrowing but also two of the smartest and funniest. There is a lot going on in both those shows.
Yeah, so we're 4 episodes deep into each, and I've got to say, initially I was not into Euphoria at all. The first episode left me really cold and I didn't like any of the characters. But we're 4 episodes deep in and I have 180'd on this show so hard. I'm really enjoying it.
I panicked for a second.
No, it is full of amazing characters.
You have no idea how distraught I would be if you came away saying, I don't like Euphoria, we will not be covering it again on the podcast.
No, I will happily cover Euphoria on the podcast.
Rips up plans.
It's great. What a show. Nate is the worst.
Yep. No argument there.
It's got quite a few HB bra moments in it, for sure.
Of course.
It's jam-packed. For the uninitiated, if you like dicks, you're going to love this show. Some real, some prosthetic.
And there's no shortage of male frontal nudity, that's true.
HBO is never shy on nudity, but as a rule it's female nudity that they show all the time on not just HBO, any TV show that has nudity in it as a rule. It's all female nudity, and like almost single-handedly Euphoria is redressing that balance on mainstream television. Dicks here, dicks there, get your dicks here. Dicks all over the shop. It's a real picking dicks. Yeah. There's a particular scene in episode 3 which is I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I was sore with laughter, and it is penis related. But yeah, I just watched the Carnival episode, which is one of the most tense episodes of TV
It's amazing.
I've seen
It's
in a long
amazing.
time. And all it is a bunch of high school kids at a carnival. But holy
Can I
shit.
ask, see, when you were watching that episode, did you go through the same thing I did? The first time I saw that episode, I thought there was something wrong with the sound. And like I was hearing a soundtrack from something else. Because Labyrinth's score in that episode is so fucking weird and so unsettling. And it is relentless. And actually, if you look at the soundtrack album by Labyrinth, that track goes on for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's Mac Quail levels of like...
Boom, 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 boom. It's like a really kind of weird, discordant waltz that just plays throughout the entirety of that carnival scene, which itself is not a short scene.
It's a really well constructed show, so I'm glad that I finally got around to watching it. And I'm glad that I persevered after not liking the first episode, because I would have kicked myself if I denied myself this show.
I guess the lesson is, don't judge a show by its first episode ever.
Yeah. Zendaya is amazing in it. That girl can act. We all know that, but she's great. And everyone in this show, there's not one bad performance in this show.
No, the cast are all really great.
It's a show about teenagers that is aimed at an adult audience. And it's surprisingly interesting, because you're like, yeah, because one of my things was like, am I going to enjoy a teenager show?
I think I had the same misgiving at first. But no, it is a very adult show in terms of, it's dealing with real issues in quite a profound way. And the fact that it's doing so at the same time as being very flashy visually, it's just kind of a bonus. If you were, I think for somebody, for the uninitiated, if you're watching that show with the sound off, I think a lot of people look at that and go, well, this is obviously a young person's show. And in a lot of ways, it is, right? But it is exploring the real meat of the issues that it's dealing with, none of which are light issues, shall we say. There's a lot of very deep psychological stuff about mental health, and also a lot of very deep social issues. It's a very of-the-moment show.
Yeah, the fact that it's created and written and showrun by a cis-het white man is surprising.
It's crazy.
He seems very in touch with stuff. I'm assuming he does a lot of research and is writing people that come on board. And
yeah, he's talked a lot about that in interviews. He seems like a top guy, Sam Levinson, but he himself struggled with drug addiction when he was younger, and so that was one of the things that got him started on this project. And then it just spiraled into a story about all of the kind of bleakness and horror that young people, particularly young people of the current moment, are dealing with. But it's, as you say, it is constructed in such a way that I think anybody of any age can relate to it, as long as you got that thing that, mind you, some people lack, called empathy.
Do you know what I really like about it? Is that unlike high school shows that were around when we were younger, particularly American high school shows, the high school isn't cliquey. There's no like mean girl plastics and then the goths. Everyone just sort of interacts.
The social groups and the social strata are all very nebulous. That is funny you bring that up, actually, because I don't know if you had this experience, but when I was growing up here in rainy old Scotland, the kind of high school culture that's portrayed in American movies and TV shows was very, very alien to the kind of milieu I grew up in, and I'm sure you would say the same thing. I mean, it was similar in some ways. There was definitely a social hierarchy, but it was never as clear-cut defined as you would see it in American movies. And I always struggled. I thought, is that actually how it is in the States? Maybe it is in some places, but certainly when I watched Euphoria, that was one of the things that struck me as well. I was like, okay, no, that this seems a bit more realistic, that, cliques and groups kind of blend in and out each other nebulously, and that's kind of feels more true to my own experience.
So yeah, it's good. I'm halfway through season 1, not including the specials that I've yet to watch too. I May Destroy You. It's a fucking bleak show.
It is, but it's also really funny.
You told me what the subject matter is, but somehow you failed to prepare me for how bleak this show is. Even when it's funny, it's fucking harrowing.
Yeah, it is. For listeners who did not hear our however many episodes it was ago, our 2020 end of year wrap up episode, we did discuss our favourite shows of the year, and that was my number one pick. It's an incredibly profound show in so many ways. I'm not going to repeat myself. You can go back and hear what I had to say about it.
Michaela Cole should get all the awards.
She's a bona fide genius. It's crazy. The work she does on that show with all of her various hats on and wigs on is incredible.
Her comedy chops and her dramatic chops and her writing chops And just all her chops
Yeah.
are so great.
She's 100% on point on all those fronts. It's breathtaking.
And she does one of the most realistic I'm on drugs faces I've ever seen.
Oh God, yes.
It's actually uncomfortable how accurate that whole, like, the third episode when they're in Italy. Like, I was watching that going, oh, that reminds me of nights out when I was younger, just looking at people going, oh.
Yeah, totally. I was getting some seriously, horrifically existential flashbacks to stuff that I really thought I'd erased from my mind during that episode. The skill she's got at being able to really mine those things that are on the one hand personal but simultaneously kind of universal. Mm-hmm. That's how you define a real talent in terms of writing fiction, in terms of writing drama, to understand human beings that well, that you can present a set of characters who are so idiosyncratic and yet still have these experiences that, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. If you've not had something directly comparable, you at least have some sort of tangential or by 1 degree of separation experience that makes it kind of comprehensible. But yeah, it deals with very bleak subject matter. It's dealing with subjects that need to be talked about, you know, and I think she's doing that so surgically, but doing it in such a human way where there's still that warmth in the centre of it. I mean, I love the relationships between the characters. I love that you really get the sense they are good pals. I love Terry. She's such a flawed character as well, but she's so funny. Yep. And I love the chemistry between her and Arabella is just chef's kiss.
It's so good. So that's it. Is it 12 episodes? Yeah,
12,
so
yeah.
I'll probably binge the last 4.
It's half-hour episodes, bite-sized chunks.
Bite-sized chunks of quality goodness. But yeah, that's what I've been doing, and it's top ratings from me for those recommendations.
Well, good shit. Well, now that you've mentioned that, it gives me a wee segue, actually. Catching up on my podcast recently, there is actually a great podcast that talks about Euphoria called Sky and Stone Do TV. I will put a link in the episode description. But the two hosts are so witty and so smart, and I've been doing some proper lols at their coverage, because they covered it when the show aired, and so I've been going back and listening to it, and I only found it recently because I was looking for a podcast after the 2 special episodes they aired over Christmas and New Year. So I went back and listened to all their stuff. They also covered Lovecraft Country, and they also covered Watchmen. And I've now listened to all their stuff, and it is really, really entertaining. They enjoyed Lovecraft Country way more than we did, but I have to say, their podcasts are so entertaining that I'm like, yeah, you make some valid points. I still don't enjoy the show as much as you did, but great podcasters. I highly recommend them. So it's one, if you're watching Euphoria right now, it'd be, if you've got, you know, some spare time to do some podcastage, I'd highly recommend that one.
Unfortunately, my spare time in the next couple of weeks is going to be reduced next to nothing, thanks to Zack Snyder.
Oh Christ!
Because, you know, I'm doing the Snyder Cut report. Depending on when we record our next episode, it might be the next episode or the episode after that.
Gee, I can't
Strap
wait. I might pretend to have died in a society.
In order to spot the differences, I am also going to rewatch Joss Whedon's Justice League before it. So I'm in for at least 6 hours of Justice League in the next couple of weeks.
Well, rather you than me, old bean.
That's the hat I'm taking for the team.
Somebody has to, or do they? Yeah, most of my time these days, when I have spare time, if I'm not reading and not researching, then I'm listening to podcasts. I do listen to a lot more podcasts lately, just because I like to see what the competition is up to. No, I enjoy podcasts. I wish podcasts had been around when I was younger, because it's actually a really pleasant way to spend time without having to engage my eyes by watching a TV show. And it's, you know, it's like that thing we used to have, what's it called, radio. Anyway, incidentally, another one that I've been listening to recently is called Damn Fine TV. You might see where this is going by that title. It is largely a Twin Peaks related podcast, but they do discuss other things.
Sorry, are they to Twin Peaks basically what we are to Mr. Robot, kind of?
Yes, actually, 100%, because they do discuss other stuff, but yeah, their core thing is Twin Peaks. So they stole our other thing that we almost were, basically. And the reason they came onto my radar was because they were guests on an episode of Talking Backwards, which I mentioned in our previous episode.
Our very good pals, Talking Backwards.
Yeah, Talking Backwards, probably the best Twin Peaks podcast in my opinion.
For the listeners, in case you don't know, we've been having some Twitter back and forth with those guys, so, you know.
Top guys out there in Tennessee. So yeah, I was made aware of Damn Fine TV through that, and it's 2 women who are the hosts. They're really great. They're really funny. Another extra delight on it for me is that one of them sounds identical to the voice of Daria's younger sister, Quinn, from the animated show Daria. And whenever she's talking, that is who I visualise. So that's how I've spent my time. I've just recently returned to the day job after a couple of weeks off work, in which I tried to be productive and failed because I listened to lots of podcasts, clearly. And then on my birthday, which was in the middle, I timed it such, you were very kind to get that video downloaded of the Dana Paula live streamed concert from recently, which I also mentioned at length on the previous episode. Not going to repeat that.
Take
don't
that,
worry.
Universal Mexico.
In your face, Universal Mexico's 11 most annoying lawyers. It has been taken down already,
Really?
by the way, I checked.
Good timing.
Yeah. So I've watched that several times, and it's still given me joy.
Speaking of pop music and R&B music,
Wait, James, is this an episode of F sub R&B?
I think it might be. Cue the music.
Hello once again, welcome to another episode of F sub R&B, the podcast in which I, Craig Woods, and my co-host James Hamilton discuss all the current happenings in R&B and soul and neo-soul music. What's been happening, James?
I'm a bit behind the curve on this one, but I recently, and when I say recently, I do mean today, discovered and heard about the new project from Anderson.Paak and Bruno Mars.
Oh, yes. Yep.
You might want to
Silk
That's it,
Sonic.
because I can never remember the name of the project.
Yeah, no, it is very, very aptly named Silk Sonic, which, to be fair, Anderson.Paak could have called all of his records that, and it would have worked. But this is definitely, well, you know what most people I think know what to expect from Bruno Mars. It's very, very smooth, and having Anderson.Paak often goes quite raw, but this is him at his most smooth and soulful. And man, the two of them together, holy shit. I mean, the serious skill of songwriting and musicianship, it's crazy, man, and it's maybe more polished than a lot of other things I listen to. It's actually more polished than a lot of stuff Anderson.Paak does, but just this one song they've released, man, it's so sensual. I honestly felt like I'd got laid.
Yeah,
after
we don't
it.
often on this podcast sing the praises of male performers.
Yes, podcast or mini podcast. No, that's true, yeah. Although this is the second time that I've been recorded on this podcast singing the praises of Anderson.Paak because I fucking...
He is great, and him and Bruno's voices work so well together. Their styles blend into it's Sonic Silk is what it is. It's incredible.
It's like pure classic era Marvin Gaye / Stevie Wonder type vibes. I mean, if you want to criticise it, it's easy to say it is very retro, but why is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, the songwriting is off the scale. I also love that both their voices are so distinctive, so there is a nice back and forth. They both bring very different qualities to their vocals. It's sumptuous, really sensual stuff, and if you don't love it, or if you don't respond to it in any kind of positive way, I honestly feel like you might not have a soul. I mean, to be fair, maybe none of us have souls. That's a metaphysical debate for another time. On this podcast, we have soul. So on the subject, since we're ensconced currently in the sweet soulfulness of this mini podcast within a podcast, another wonderful artist I've been digging for quite a while now, but she is about to drop a new album imminently, is an artist from southeast London called Greentea Peng. I actually forget what her real name is, but Greentea Peng, does it matter? That's a fantastic name. She's an incredible vocalist. She's got all the soul of the classic 90s neo-soul singers, but her music itself is such an eclectic blend of neo-soul, R&B, and there's this kind of psychedelic dimension that she brings in. And there's also hints of reggae in it as well, so you'll love it, James.
Wait, a bit of reggae? Is this an episode of F sub reggae within an episode of F sub R&B?
James, I think it might be.
Cue the music.
Give us some reggae! Give us some reggae!
Hello and welcome once again to another episode of F sub reggae, in which I, Craig Woods, attempt to introduce James into the sounds of contemporary reggae. Now this time, James, is a wee bit of a cheat because we are talking about Greentea Peng.
Oh, I remember we were once talking about Greentea Peng in an episode of F sub R&B.
Yeah, does that ring a bell? It rings a bell for me. So she's generally speaking a kind of neo-soul R&B artist with some psychedelic flourishes. There are also occasionally strong reggae elements in her music, so I figured you would dig some of this. This might help guide you on your way, in my quest anyway, to try and inculcate you into more of an appreciation for the reggae form. So this song is called Revolution. It just came out last year. Amazing song, great, very political of the moment lyrics. It's a great video too. Lovely shots of South London. I'll let you dig in and see what you think. Hit play on that.
Alright,
info.
I'm hitting play right now. It's quite short, only 2.5 minutes.
Feels like a revolution. But whose revolution? As we search for solution.
Alright, okay, yeah. Immediately in with the political lyricism.
Yeah. What do you think of her voice, by the way?
I think it's Sonic Silk.
I think I agree. It's a very rich, velvety voice. We also have to talk about her aesthetic, really, because she looks incredible.
Her outfits are pretty great.
Yeah.
She rocks that headscarf really well. She's looking exotic in Dalston, which is not something I've ever seen in real life.
You're right. So how are you digging the reggae elements of this song?
It's... I'm digging it.
Cool.
This video looks like it was shot quite near a venue that used to be in Dalston, the name of which I can't remember, but I played in a lot.
The venue in question is Barden's Boudoir, a venue James played in at least 5 times with 2 different bands, but the ravages of age and too much Esteva's Pinot Noir are clearly apparent here.
I'm trying to park in Dalston's a nightmare, so I'm being distracted by this area of Dalston, but yeah, no, this is good. I think this might be playlist.
Oh,
I'm in the breakdown now, where she's sort of gone a bit rappy.
Yeah, that bit is really great. Yeah, it's like she could do it all. She's a very, very versatile vocalist. But one thing I really love about her is the almost kind of slightly nonchalant delivery.
Yeah.
I mean, her voice is so rich on its own that she doesn't really need to do anything. It just kind of is its own thing. Even though it's a very different kind of voice, she does have that sort of Georgia Smith energy where the voice just kind of is a living being with its own identity and its own agency.
As an aside, towards the end of the video, she's standing around on what looks like a big bunch of speakers. Whenever I hear the term sound system in relation to reggae or dub, my head always imagines a big stack of speakers that looks like that.
Yeah.
So, perfect sound system chat there from Greentea Peng. That Revolution by Greentea Peng is definitely playlist for me. That is a real nice tune. I can't believe it's over already.
And with that in mind, James, 5s out of 9, what are you thinking for Revolution by
Greentea Peng gets a solid 7.5. 5s out of 9.
That's pretty decent. I will take that. Well, since you enjoyed that, you'll probably love one of her more R&B/soul imbued tracks. But of course, in order to do that, that would have to be an episode of F-Sub R&B.
Is this a return to the episode of F-Sub R&B?
I think it is.
Toodle pip.
Toodle
Cue
pip.
the music.
Give us a break!
Hello and welcome back to F-Sub R&B. Good ep there from F-Sub Reggae. Nice to hear from those guys. Alright James, so I've just sent you another link there. This is Greentea Peng's live performance of her song Downers for the Colours studio, which was a couple of years ago. This will hit all your R&B soul buttons, but in a way that it's like it'll be like you're hearing soul, neo-soul for the first time. I guarantee you, it's that good.
It'll make me feel like a teenager again.
As the host of F-Sub Reggae just said, you will really see on this performance just how effortless her vocal delivery is. Yeah, just hit play on that and
alright, I'm hitting play now.
I can't smell the flowers, felt empty now for hours. Lost my power.
Her voice is very different from the last track. Got the stylistic gymnastics.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's another stellar outfit choice as well.
I'm trying to figure out what the tattoo on her neck is. Like the one right on her throat. That must have been painful.
Yeah, it would have been, 'cause that's a hell of a tender area to get tattooed. I actually I remember seeing her talk about that somewhere recently. I don't remember where, though. I'll have to look that up.
You know what I like, Craig? And what I like is the 90s.
I was very confident in this hitting your buttons. Yeah.
Her stylistic delivery here is 90s neo soul AF, and I'm really into this. There's elements of Nina Cherry in there.
You can definitely see that lineage in there.
But it's got some contemporary rhythmic stuff going on.
And a great lyricist. All of her stuff, her wordplay is often very subtle, but it's also very kind of imagist in a sense. Certainly more so in this song than in Revolution. Revolution, of course, is very upfront, a political song. She has no real issue with shifting those kind of gears. She's equally skilled at those kind of different lyrical fronts. She's an incredible artist. She was one of those artists that sort of languished on one of my playlists for ages, because I remember hearing one song by her and then I just kind of randomly started adding all of her songs, but then I never got around to listening to them for ages. And then it was about a year ago, maybe just about the start of lockdown, I really just dove in to all of her stuff, and I was like, man, this is a banquet of sound. I mean, everything she is incapable of making a bad song. Every single track is so good.
Do you know what's funny as well? I've forgotten that this is a live performance.
Right, I know.
Her voice just sounds like 1,000 takes in a studio mashed together to make the best take, and she's doing it live.
The Colours studio performances, by the way, are all round fantastic. Have you seen many?
No, this is my first Colours studio performance.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. All your favourite artists.
Amazing! I can't wait to watch the Rush one.
But from like the more mainstream all the way to more obscure ones, it's a great resource for finding new artists. Actually, I've been following it for ages, and it's quite often where I pick up new artists in R&B and hip hop and grime and whatnot. It's definitely worth getting on.
Do you know
your
what I just
radar.
did, Craig?
What did you
I
just
just
do?
did something that anyone who's listening to us on YouTube should do, and I hit that subscribe button.
Get in.
It's a call to action if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, give us a like. More on that later.
Alright, I think that wraps it up for another exciting edition of F's a Bad and
Toodle pip.
Toodle pip.
Good ep.
Good eps.
Good ep within an ep. That was podcastception.
They said it shouldn't be done.
We cared not.
Alright, so before we move on with Mr. Robot business, finally, we are going to get to Mr. Robot in just a second, listeners. Anything else of note that's occurred in the last couple of weeks or so?
Some sad news in the world of metal, Craig.
Oh no.
In a section that I'm going to call Press F Sobriety.
I don't want to laugh, but you kind of made it hard for me.
Rest in power, entombed vocalist LG Petrov, who sadly passed of cancer
sure.
this week. Entombed a very
Yeah, that
very
sucks, man.
influential metal band, and he was pretty young comparatively, so that sucked. But I'm sure that he would like the knowledge that he was the inaugural member of Press F Sobriety and could help spread a little joy.
Yeah, that's definitely what he will be remembered for, James, I'm sure. But you know, that is shit, man, and it's another one on a long list, it seems, over the last year or so, where so many fucking legends are just dropping dead. Although, not to be selfish about this, but it's now making me think we should have come up with Press F Sobriety way earlier than this. Missed opportunity.
Well,
but if things continue as they are, there'll be no shortage of future deaths of beloved musical icons.
Yeah, I was
and
going to
such.
say, ideally we don't get to do it very often, but...
You're right, be careful what you wish for and whatnot.
You seen anything else in the socials this week, Craig? What's been piquing your interest?
One particular thing on the socials that brought me much joy just in the last week or so. MC Jean Grey, who, if anyone's not familiar with Jean Grey, she's an incredible hip-hop artist, one of the prime lyricists, and also just an extraordinary human being. But she, earlier this week, she posted on her Twitter an interview that she had done with Marvel, all about how, for one thing, how she got her name, all about her relationship with comics and about Marvel specifically. There are a lot of comic book references in her lyrics, by the way, which is what makes what I'm about to say all the more hilarious. Somebody had said to her on her Twitter, oh, that's cool. There's a Marvel character called Jean Grey, as if, do you know that? Which, I don't know that you can get more mansplaining than that. I feel like that's peak mansplain. To which Jean Grey replied, she retweeted the comment and she said, oh, there's a comic book female named Jean Grey, you say? Who knew? So she's Marvel, right? Well then, why wasn't she in Spider-Man's or the Justice Avengers movie? Which you think, okay, surely people will get the message from that. But no, never underestimate the sheer density of mansplainer comic nerds. One underneath immediately comments, for years I figured that's where you got your name from. Someone then says to her, the Justice Avengers are not a thing. The Avengers are from Marvel, actually, and the Justice League is from DC. To which Jean Grey replied, the Justice Avengers are a thing, and they have Hulk and Thor and superhero person, stupid. Also, she says, the Justice Group can't be from DC. They don't fight to go-go music. Get out of here. She then says, you guys are so silly. I don't know anything about comac books, spelled C-O-M-A-C. To which someone then replied, oh, I get that now. But the uniqueness in your name all these years, I promise you most people thought of X-Men. It's like, Jesus Christ. I actually commented on this with the gif from The Simpsons going, please stop, he's already dead. She also says, to the guy who says, I figured that's where you got your name from, she says, I can assure you Jean Grey is my formal birth-given name. Definitely did not get it from a comic. I would have totally said something about that by now, if so. And what's especially great about that is not only has she referenced comic books continuously in her lyrics, but this was literally just moments after she had posted a link to the interview I described just moments ago. And to paraphrase FBI agent Albert Rosenfield, and it's another great day in the history of men on the internet.
Incredible.
I think the only other thing of note that's happened in the last week, well, apart from the whole Harry and Meghan shenanigans, which have spawned another raft of fantastic memes, was the less than edifying spectacle in Glasgow of the fans of the football club Rangers, some of you may have heard of them, having won the Scottish League and proceeded to embark on what can only be described as a Mad Max-esque rampage through the streets of Glasgow. Really bringing it all home to us, reminding us all what it is that makes the old firm so great, and not remotely a shameful blight on Scotland's general landscape.
Yep, bringing pride to Scotland with their breaking of memorial benches in George Square, urinating over statues that mere months ago they would have been fighting to protect from BLM protesters.
Yep. Singing God Save the Queen and giving Nazi salutes. Yeah, it's great stuff. It's great stuff. My favourite thing about it, though, is that this happened on the same weekend as the blinding revelation that the guy from Mumford & Sons is a bit of a fascist sympathiser. Now, shock horror, everyone.
Wait, are you the guy who's the son of a hedge fund manager?
I know, who saw it? Set faces too stunned. But yeah, that's what occurred. And the fact that these two things happened simultaneously, it did bring it home to me that the door really is wide open right now for a Glasgow-based Mumford's parody band called Scumford and Huns. On that edifying note, I think we should dispense with bar chat and get down to the serious business of Mr. Robot.
If you've just joined us, having skipped from the beginning, welcome.
We don't blame
welcome.
you.
Welcome to our podcast.
If you've stuck with us, thank you so much.
Welcome to our new episode of F Sobriety. In this week's episode, we'll be discussing Mr. Robot.
Season 1, Episode 7.
View source.
Written by Kate Erickson and directed by show creator and showrunner Sam Esmail.
Who you may know from such shows as Mr. Robot and Homecoming.
You get any trivia points this week?
I've got some trivia about Kate Erickson.
Do you know what we need? We know what we need. I've realised this after listening to Talking Backwards. We need a Jamesy stats sting. Do you think of one?
I'll think of a James's stats sting. Here's some trivia I can tell you about Kate Erickson. Like several of the writers of Mr. Robot that we've talked about recently, Kay Erickson was a writer on the TV shows Copper and The Borgias. She's also written Fear the Walking Dead, and I believe you had something that she'd written as well.
The Passage, which is one of those shows I'm only dimly aware of because the concept just sounds like it's going to be one of those shows that could either be fantastic or literally the worst piece of shit you've ever seen.
Now, I believe this is the only episode of Mr. Robot that she's written. Is that correct?
Yeah, she's another one and done.
Yep. And obviously directed by Sam Esmail. Again, this will be a credit that will become more and more common as we go on.
Right, yeah. He's got one more episode this season, I believe. I think it's the season finale. And then from then on, our man Esmail is the only captain of this ship as far as directorial duties go. Alright, shall we dive into this?
Let's do it.
So we're straight off the harrowing climax of the previous episode that left us, as I described it, as the Guantanamo Bay Matt Quayle torture device of that wailing siren, the trauma of having Elliot reveal Shayla's butchered body in the trunk of the car.
Yeah, with the siren still ringing in our ears.
So where do we go? Where does Mr. Esmail take us?
What he does is, he decides he's going to just rub salt in that open emotional
He
wound.
really does. Sam, you diabolical bastard. Because we literally begin with the sound of a siren in the episode, and then it segues into a very gentle flashback, but it's staged in such a way we do not immediately realise it's a flashback.
No, but do you know what I did notice about it though?
What's that?
The man in van, I think, if not the same, is very similar to the man in van outside Elliot's apartment in this series finale.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I did not notice that.
I got big end of season vibes, or end of series, sorry, vibes, when as soon as I saw that scene I was like, yep, when he's taking the box out and stuff.
Okay, I mean, I would not put it past Sam to put in that level of detail, so yeah, that seems cromulent. We get this flashback, and it's the day that Shayla moved into Elliot's apartment building. But the way this is staged, there's no signpost given that this is actually a flashback, because what we're given is Elliot walking up the stairs very trepidatiously as he hears someone shuffling around in the apartment that we know to be Shayla's. So I've written here, it's Ghost Shayla, or shall we call her Shayla Wheat? That's a reference to the hit movie Ghost from 1990, starring Patrick Swayze. So Elliot arrives at the apartment, that's all the shuffling around. I've written, Elliot does a morphine. Here's some breaking glass, and Shayla comes to the door, batters on the door, says, this fucking line, Sam, man, or Kate Erickson, whoever's responsible for this, I'm bleeding all over the hallway. It's considering the last time we saw Shayla. Like, fuck off, Sam. And she says this is a life or death situation. Yeah, so there's a real twist to the knife here. It is. So when she enters, her hair is different, so there is a definite signifier here at this point. Just in case you hadn't got it already, it's not really a ghost, guys. We are in a flashback. She is carrying QWERTY in a small drinking tumbler, which is such a great, sad touch. She says, if I kill that thing, my 6-year-old niece's world is going to collapse. So this is a beautiful setup, and she actually says here, this is a nice setup.
But she prefers her own.
The lackadaisical way she kind of leans back on Elliot's sofa, leans forward, tests the morphine, and she says, let me know if you want a top shelf hookup. That's everything we need to know about Shayla. So she insists that Elliot help her move this dresser, calls him Mr. Muscles, which is pretty funny, and they leave QWERTY in the glass. What I like here is QWERTY is literally left by the window, just as he requested a couple of episodes ago. So a needle drop, it's pictures of you by The Cure that's playing in the background, and Shayla is musing, don't you love music? I love music, I love going to concerts, all the people. Elliot just very brusquely says no.
At that point I put up the samesies from Mean Girls gif.
Yeah, he doesn't like people, not most of them. So Shayla muses, well, if that means if you did like someone, it would have to be special. And she says, well, she aims for special, so challenge accepted. This whole exchange is so sweet, and I hate Sam for it. Yeah. It drives me nuts, man. So she finally introduces herself as she's walking off, and she muses about a man whom we now know to be Fernando Vera, a guy she knows who can hook Ellie up with what he needs, basically. But she says, but he's a psychopath. But you might be worth a psychopath.
Spoiler alert, he's not.
So now we know, literally, that Elliot is responsible for having brought Vera into Shayla's life. That is literal, it's not just figurative, which is pretty crushing. The other thing this does is, in a way, I think also it sort of accentuates Fernando Vera's whole thing about there being this cosmic, fateful thing about it, that somehow this was all destined to happen, and that it was Elliot who kicked it all into motion. And this whole weird idea that Vera has, that Elliot is some kind of prophet for him. You can see how in the mind of someone who views the world in that skewed way that Vera does, it does make a certain kind of sense. And what's particularly painful about it is you now know, especially because it's illustrated to us with the monologue that Elliot gives us in just a bit, that he now believes that too, that he is responsible. But anyway, we've still got, and we will always have, the immortal line, "Keep the fish, you filthy animal." Before we continue this, I just want to bring something up quickly. It's a twofold thing that I think needs to be addressed, because it is something we've talked about before, not in the podcast, but when we've discussed this show just as fans of the show while it was still airing. First of all, there is the point about just how many people die on the show generally, right? There are so many major characters in this show that we've been introduced to so far already who do not make it out alive. Shayla's been the first casualty, really. We also know that Vera will not make it out alive. We also know that Angela will not make it out alive. Terrell will not make it out alive. Joanna will not make it out alive.
Gideon will not make it out alive.
Gideon, yeah. There's so many Cisco.
Romero.
So many Trenton.
Mobley.
So many characters in this episode alone that just do not make it out this story. And when you sit and really consider that, when you've seen the whole thing, you think about that in the context, this has got to be outside of a Russian novel. It's got to have one of the highest death counts of any fictional text. I mean, I guess beyond like action movies where bodies just drop continuously, but of major characters who actually have agency in the story, Christ, man, this is a bloodbath. This is a bloodbath waiting to happen.
Yep.
But the other thing I wanted to say was, we touched on it before, is the whole question of fridging, because there are quite a few women in this show who die in order to service the plot, and Shayla's the first one here. And it can be argued, and I'm not saying I make this argument, but I think I've seen it be argued, that Shayla's death really only serves to make Elliot more anguished and to drive him forwards to where the writers need him to be. And so therefore Shayla is nothing more than a device in a way. I kind of get where that criticism comes from, and I will admit the first time I saw this show I was not thinking about it with Shayla, but then again there probably have been many times that I've watched or read or consumed uncertain number of cultural narratives and not noticed it, because being a dude I might not notice it. It's just something I might not notice. Given though that there are other characters you can argue this happens to, I'm thinking particularly of Joanna and Angela. Is this a problem in this show?
I would say so, if it wasn't for the fact that it happens to a lot of male characters in the show as well. A lot of the male characters in this show die to service the plot. But when I say die to service the plot, it makes it sound like that's a criticism, and it's not. I mean, their death is an integral part of the plot as well as servicing it. So if it was a case of women in Elliot's life keep dying in order to make him an angry boy, I would be like...
I mean, in fairness, it does happen twice. First Shayla, and then in season 4 it happens with Angela, and both of those are devastating. Now, it's a tough one, because Angela specifically definitely has her own agency, and we will talk more about that even in this episode. I don't think it's such a problem with her, because I think she had her own agency. It's true she went down a bad path. Not every character can have a happy ending, and I think that's fine. I think her death was so impactful as well, in a way that several of the characters' deaths are. But I have seen this criticism made that the way Angela went out it did the character a disservice. I understand why people say that, but I actually don't think that's the case. I think Angela's death felt natural, and in a weird way, and we will eventually discuss this when we get further down the line, in a weird way there's a note of triumph in Angela's death that I would say prevents... It's a weird thing to say for someone who gets killed, but there is a weird note of triumph in her death that definitely prevents her from being fridged. That and the fact that she had 3 whole seasons when she was very much a pivotal character. The Sheila one's a wee bit more thorny because we only know her in this first season and she never comes back. And it is one of those things where I think what makes it a bit more complicated is we start to learn that Angela is the one that Elliot was really in love with. And so you could argue that any other woman in his life was kind of a deflection of his affections. Hey, that rhymes. And so therefore, is Sheila just a device? I'm torn about the Sheila one, I will admit. I was not thinking about it the first time I ever watched the show, but now I'm a wee bit torn about it. I don't really... I guess it comes down to the question, could the writers have achieved the same journey for Elliot without killing a woman? I guess that's the question. I'm not entirely sure I have a concrete answer, because Sam Esmail's a very inventive writer, and he's clearly got a very skilled writing staff. I feel they probably could have come up with something else. But on the other hand, Sheila's a really interesting and entertaining character in her own way, and the things that she imbues into Elliot in their relationship become very important for him going forward. So in that sense, you could argue at least part of her lives on. It's a complicated subject. I do say all of this knowing full well that we're the least qualified to be discussing this, but it is one of those things that I just think needs to be needly to consider.
She lives on in QWERTY.
Yeah. But did QWERTY survive the nuclear explosion?
I'm pretty certain QWERTY does not survive the nuclear meltdown.
Do you know what? That would be a great post-credit scene. If they were just trawling the wreckage and something, oh, look at this, and then that whole window thing was still intact.
Or QWERTY crawls out mutated by the nuclear leakage, and QWERTY is the first X-Man.
Oh, god damn it, there's the crossover we needed. Alright, so we might revisit this subject further down the line, but I thought it was worth introducing into our thoughts at least.
A lot of people die in this show. I'm sure it'll come up again.
They do, yeah. There's no shortage of deaths.
However, we do take a significant leap in time forward after this. A full month in the timeline.
The full monthy?
Yep. In the timeline of Mr. Robot Witch. Are you still keeping track on the timeline on this rewatch?
Right, so more or less, we're definitely in April now.
Yep.
Is the only way I can figure it. So we're like a maximum maybe 3 weeks before the 5/9 hack, but I think it might even be shorter than that.
I think it's less because, spoiler alert, guys, when I was watching this episode to take notes for it, for doing the podcast, Amazon has the autoplay to the next episode, and I went and watched the next episode as well immediately after it.
Damn you, Bezos!
And the next episode is pretty close to 5/9. Like, it's days from 5/9.
So it's like late April at this point in that case.
It might even be early September.
Oh, right, yes, sorry. As a Stuart Lee reference.
Yeah, it might even be early May.
Huh. Okay, that's interesting. I guess, you know what, actually, I think I do sometimes. I start to get the seasons mushed together in my mind, so I think part of me is like, that seems like an awfully short space of time for Angela to make the journey she does towards the end of this first season, but maybe there's not as much of a journey as I remember. I guess they do save the bulk of it for season 2. But I'm just remembering that by the end of this season, she is wearing shoes spattered with the brains of an Ecor executive, so it's quite a journey from here, and just, you know, if it is like just over a week or whatever, that's an eventful week.
So we come to Elliot sitting once again in Krista's office, not listening to her.
He describes this whole thing as a blip, and he says Sheila is a blip. He hates himself for getting used to her absence, and he muses that she'll now become an anecdote, as in I knew a girl who died, with the added bonus of she's dead because of me. Bruh.
Harsh.
And he's focusing all his attention on the socket there, waiting for Special Agent Dale Cooper to emerge, I assume.
Take a drink.
Take a drink. So Krista is making Elliot fill out some forms. Turns out he's been coming to her for a whole year for his anger management issues, which once again I cannot believe I did not pay more attention to this and ask more questions about. Elliot wonders, as you said, how much time he spent not listening to her and her voice bouncing around the room. He says that Krista doesn't believe in him, but Krista immediately contradicts that by saying, I believe that you can get better, and she says that some part of him wants to do this right. Now that's interesting, because we know there are different parts of Elliot with different levels of agency.
Yep.
I guess you could look at it as it's the quote-unquote real Elliot that wants to do this right, to get to the bottom of this conundrum. But Elliot, however, he asks us, is it us that Krista is referring to? Are you on her side, he asks. So he signs the forms, and on his way out he says, "You should clean your sockets." I like the visual metaphor there that even Krista has things kicking around in her private spaces that she has not cleaned out, and it will actually come to the fore at the end of this episode what that might be referring to.
Because Krista does recommend that he comes back, even though his court-mandated time is up.
This is the thing I love about this character, Krista. You really do get the sense she cares about Elliot. She cares about her patients. She wants to do this right. She's human, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's not just a job. Interesting to note, from this point onward, Elliot sort of takes a wee bit of a backseat in this episode. We do see him a few more times. You could argue he's not the protagonist of this episode, though.
Because, of course, he's on screen a lot, but it's not him. And we didn't see this.
There is that aspect also.
Like, why do they keep showing us Mr. Robot and not Elliot?
Angela, of course, is very proactive this episode as well. And, of course, we get more Darlene this episode. So Elliot, the Elliot we thought we knew at this point, is very much in the backseat. He's very much trying to take stock of where he is, which makes complete sense. And again, this is one of the things I know I mentioned before, but I was speaking specifically about the way the show is structured season to season. But even episode to episode like this, the show is really clever about where it lets the story breathe in just the right places. Because for Elliot to just continue doing Mr. Robot shit at this point immediately after the Shayla situation would just be, it'd be so cheap. And there'd be so many other shows would do exactly that. You would have the performative bit of grief, and the grief would be reduced to exposition, as it often is in a lot of TV shows. Here they do it the right way. You really see Elliot deal with his grief in this episode.
I feel like the fact that he talks about there's been that whole month and he does seem to retreat into himself, it makes sense that it's up to Mr. Robot to get the gang back together, because Elliot is in no position to do it.
And this is the fun thing to think about now when we're going back and putting the puzzle together of where physically Elliot's body is at different parts of the day. Man, it's crazy. It's like zipping over to Romero's place to threaten him with a gun, and, having beers with Darlene, but in between he's like taking Flipper to the vet. It's fantastic. It's like Moon Knight. Yeah. It's like Moon Knight goes off to drive a taxi, and then he's stuck in the rooftops, and then he's a millionaire playboy.
So I think this episode takes place over the course of a week, because at the start Krista does say come back again, and I assume it's weekly he goes to see her, and the episode ends with him going to see her again. Yeah. So yeah. I guess maybe this could be, like you say, late April, and then it's early May by the end of the episode.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yep.
Which would explain why Elliot zips around so much over the course of this.
Yeah, that does make more sense, because I always start to think, I was perfectly prepared to run with it, because it was entertaining in my mind that Elliot is just stalking around New York City, using all that time on public transport to transition from one personality to the next, get himself in the zone, going out in the subway, depressed about Shayla, then during the subway ride just punching himself in the face to get himself hyped up into Mr. Robot mode to go and threaten Romero. Alright, a daily basis makes more sense. Yep. Right, so Atara Nayar and Angela meet with Terry Colby's lawyers. Nayar wants a meeting off the record with Colby, so they're keeping Angela's cards to their chest at this point. So Atara Nayar says to the lawyers that they are offering Terry Colby a glimmer of hope, and the lawyers kind of scoff and do a bolt. At Allsafe, I really enjoy this scene. Elliot goes to visit Gideon in his office, and Gideon is being Mr. Nice Boss, offering some time off, which Elliot refuses, and then immediately makes to leave. It's just classic, cannot deal with emotional stuff, sorry. And Gideon says, right, as much as this is funny, it's one of those things this show does all the time that's simultaneously a wee bit heart-wrenching, because I do feel for Gideon here. He genuinely is trying to let Elliot know that he genuinely cares about him, and he's genuinely trying to give him good advice here. So don't let her death close you off. Find someone you can be your honest self with. And that's when we get this great segue to Elliot remembering as a child finding the source codes and websites and copying them over to make the sites his own kind of thing. And he says to us, view source, what if we had that for people? Would people really want to see? And then we get this great sequence of all the members of the Allsafe staff stoating around the office wearing signs around their necks declaring such fabulous captions as
I love feet.
I love feet is amazing. I pretend to love my husband. I steal. I'm bulimic. I'm empty inside. And Elliot is saying to us, honest self, bullshit. And this is pure Tyler Durden vibes, right? And this is one of these moments where early in this show, I can kind of see why the mob that I call the We Live in a Society mob kind of got seduced by this show and have been in denial ever since that it's not the show they actually thought it was. Because there's a point here where this show could be really cynical and really cliched, edgy, you know. It could really go down that route. And one of the things I love about Sam Esmail's writing is he always has that very human thing where he allows the characters to have these moments where, let's be honest, we all have moments where we resonate with these sentiments, but he's never going to make that the characters' lives, you know, because first of all, who other than the We Live in a Society types are really interested in that story? It's a narcissistic reaction, and Sam is a clever enough writer. I mean, obviously he had a bigger story with Elliot in mind anyway, but he's a clever enough writer that he's able to insert these things that are relatable in the moment. And now when you go back and look at them, there's a tragic side to this, because we now know that Elliot is, or the mastermind, whoever, all of the personalities really, are reacting this way because they're in pain.
Sam Esmail in this moment is basically Trenton, and the We Live in a Society audience are how Trenton views Darlene.
Oh, dude, that's beautiful, because that really resonates with what I've got written about that scene later. Yeah, no, 100%. And we'll call back round to this when we get there, but that's a fantastic call. Yeah, because it's taken the revolution for revolution's sake thing. And, you know, the fact that Kate Erickson, whoever came up with this line, right, because it's a writer's room, we'll never know. But the fact that Elliot says bullshit immediately after he said that to us, it's like he's subconsciously calling himself on his own bullshit. And I like that idea, and it's one of the things I endlessly love about this show, is that you can go back and interpret all these things into it. But yeah, that's a wonderful call, dude. But anyway, he turns to Gideon, still in full V for Vendetta mask mode, but the face he presents to Gideon says, oh, really good advice, thanks. And it's a classic Rami Malek delivery. It's as equal parts robotic and quiet and understated that you could take it as genuine, but Gideon fully knows that something is not right here. So this is when we segue over to Mr. Robot and Darlene in the bar, and we have to remind ourselves that this is Elliot and Darlene in the bar.
I love this scene. Everything about this scene is amazing. The ambience, the cinematography, the atmosphere of this scene is just...
It's so good.
Chef's kiss. This is Sam Esmail at his best.
Yeah, the mise-en-scène is so good. So Mr. Robot is reading from the paper about F Society being quiet, and the Secretary of Home Security has said that these groups lack the resources and knowledge to launch a full attack, etc. Mr. Robot is very insistent that they need to get the Dark Army back online. Darlene says that she's been trying to hack Cisco, but she's been nearly impossible. But she has essentially been posing as him, or trying to pose as him, in the message groups. Mr. Robot is insisting he wants to talk to White Rose directly. And Darlene says, if White Rose even exists, there's no way that meeting is happening face to face. And she turns to the guy slouched unconscious at the bar. For all we know, this guy is White Rose. Excuse me, you White Rose? I love this so much. It's peak Darlene.
In the hands of a lesser writer, that would have been White Rose.
Yeah, totally.
If I was writing this show, that would have been fucking White Rose for sure.
It's in response to the no reply, she says, likely story. By the way, this is something this show does all the time as well. Is it's not shy to use cliches in the dialogue at times, but it uses them in a very pointed way. Because Mr. Robot here says, I have a plan in motion, to which Darlene just scoffs, and God is laughing. And it's Darlene's delivery that makes it work.
That she can deliver lines that other people wouldn't make work.
Yeah,
you know?
No, totally.
Shout out to Carly Jacob once again.
So Elliot adds Sheila to the digital cemetery, and of course the CD she's been given is Disintegration by The Cure.
She's more fortunate than whoever has got Don't Look Back by Boston.
Right, exactly. Well, it could have been worse. It could have been Drake or Pitbull.
Yeah, or Blur's self-titled album, which is also in that section.
Or as I call it, the Song 2 album. So Elliot tells us he'll miss her, And then he says, wind up the klaxon, James.
Yes. Yes, yes.
It's wipe down time.
Yes!
Except we don't get the full wipe down montage. We only get what I'm calling the McCain's microchips. Which, by the way, I'm never going to get over this. Every time this happens, this gives me anxiety every time he does this, man. Elliot, you're going to set fire to your apartment, mate. Stop doing this.
And Elliot is sad.
Elliot
Obviously.
does a sad, is that what it says, your notes?
Yep. And then it says, speaking of sad boys, check out Tyrell.
Oh yeah, so Tyrell and these three sad sacks in Tyrell's office.
This is one of my favourite Tyrell Wellick moments.
It is peak Tyrell. So these three sad sack executive douchebags
Executive bangers.
discussing earning reports and such. Tyrell, meanwhile, is very distracted, let's just say. So clearly still stung from the whole Scott Knowles situation. One douchebag says that he almost left Ecor to go to Google. He says he got a blowjob off the hiring executive. Says she was hot. She had a Marissa Mayer thing going on. Which, Marissa Mayer, for anyone who doesn't know, is the former CEO of Yahoo, also an early employee of Google. So clearly this is a thing. This is probably a thing that guys in the tech corporations, I can imagine this conversation going down. Nothing in this seems unbelievable.
This is these guys' day at work. They just turn up, sit around, and have bro chat.
Yeah, it's just shitty dude bro bounce.
Not today, dude bros.
yeah. He says hot executives are just hot assistants who fucked their way at the top faster than us. Ugh. Just shoot these guys already. Douchebag number 2 says he's heard that some assistants are going gay to move up. Douchebag number 1 counters, he's heard a handful of desperate execs are also going cock jockey, as he succinctly puts it. At which point, Tyrell, clearly triggered from this, given his recent shenanigans with Philip Price's assistant, and also because I guess he's just not at his best right now. He decides he's going to take out his anger on this asshole. And as problematic as Tyrell is, man, I love this moment. I'm fully in Tyrell's corner at this point.
He asks him how his kids are.
Oh yeah, he says, I don't know, sent them off to a private school.
It's like, I sent them off to Lawrence. I think Julia likes art. Can't win them all. And Tyrell says,
Lawrence? You'll never be able to afford that tuition and unemployment. Sorry?
You're fired!
And it's the awkward silence that follows as Tyrell kind of gathers himself and then smiles. At which point, douchebag number 1 thinks that's his cue to laugh, like it's all been a joke. At which point, I just love how Tyrell, without missing a beat, turns to the other two and says, you two as well. I'm going to make sure you get minimum severance packages. Like, what did we do? And Tyrell, completely absent, staring out the window. Nothing. And the thing is, it is nothing, because Tyrell will have seen this plenty of times before. He will have taken part in this kind of shit banter plenty of times before. But he's not in the mood for playing.
yep.
It's a complete abuse of power, and I shouldn't be enjoying it, but fuck these guys.
Meanwhile,
Claxton. Atara Nayar's office. So Angela arrives to find that Atara Nayar has been discussing the case with the state attorney. She tells Angela that Terry Colby's lawyers have called and they want total immunity, which she has just obtained from said state attorney. Terry Colby's agreed with the caveat that Angela has to go alone, and Atara says, one last time, are you sure you want to do this? And I feel like this is an important question at this point, because this does feel like last chance road for Angela. The last point where she could have chosen a different path.
Yeah.
Because from this point on, like for a good chunk of Mr. Robot, her storyline is so separate from Elliot's, even though they do cross over. It's like she's so embarking on her own adventure that from this point is so grim and makes my skin crawl that part of me feels a wee bit sad that this is the last point. I'm like, oh, Angela, it could have been so different. Which is not to say I don't sympathise with her from at any point from this point on. It's just that, man, things get complicated.
There's a moment in the next episode which gave me the same feels as well, but more about that next episode for us.
Across town, in Romero's Poison Ivy lab.
Romero's body shop.
Mr. Robot turns up, and we have to remind ourselves again. Elliot turns up. So let's visualise that. This is the game we've got to play now for the rewatch. Elliot turns up in his hoodie, And Romero pulls a gun on him, says, I thought you were one of those high schoolers that stole my mother's chaise lounge. So Elliot, in his hoodie, says, I'm putting everybody back together. Romero says he's out, and Elliot says, this is a waste of your potential. Now all this Slater dialogue, because it's so Christian Slater, it's hard to imagine anybody else delivering it. So we really have to try hard to imagine this being delivered in Rami Malek's voice.
Yeah.
And when you do imagine it, it's actually genuinely fucking chilling, because Christian Slater is scary enough. He's always had that edge to him, as we've discussed before. It's what made him such a draw back in the late 80s, early 90s, was he always had that dangerous appeal. Rami Malek is a slightly different beast. He can have that dangerous quality, but there is something about him physically that, because his face can change from being so sort of friendly and affable one second to then having that very steely expression, and because he has those pale blue eyes as well, when you imagine these lines being delivered by Rami Malek in that steely stone-faced mode, it's genuinely chilling, man. If you imagine that Rami saying, now you're borderline pissing me off.
I mean, we've seen Rami Malek, as I believe we discussed last episode, at the prison doing a Christian Slater.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we can
the
now
show
visualize.
has given us pointers, yeah.
Yeah, and Romero's like, yeah, what happens if I cross that line?
Elliot, Mr. Robot, says, you and I both know I'm crazy and not the cute kind. And he does a classic Mr. Robot, smashes a few things up, pulls Romero's gun that he's picked up without Romero noticing, says, I don't want to hurt you, I love you, man. That's a classic Slater delivery.
Yeah, and it's echoes of Vera as well.
Shit, that's a good call, actually.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can feel how the toxic influences he's kind of drawing from. Yeah, that's a good point. Given we will not see Vera for a long time, it's interesting to note that this stuff is fermenting away in Elliot on some level. So I didn't note it here, but it's one thing I do note a lot, but I'm just going to insert it here. Man, this show is good. Says, just come back to the arcade with me so we can change the world together. I'm clearly too crazy for you to say no to. It's when he pretends to fire the gun, shouting bang, and Romero, as you would, fucking bricking it. It's like the look in your face, priceless. And yeah, again, this is one of those moments that in the hands of a lesser show or a lesser movie that's used that same crazy guy cliche so many times, and in the hands of a lesser actor, this would be a bullshit scene, you know. But Slater makes it work, always makes it work. So you gave your word to finish this, and I gave mine about what I would do if you didn't. Fucking hell, man.
Which makes you wonder what that conversation looked like, so I really want that prequel comic book.
Yeah, the comic from Black Mask, yeah.
Yep.
Bring it on. Casting aside for the moment the mastermind of it all and such, just looking at this from someone who's watching this show from the first time, I think this is another one of those real kind of revelatory moments where you do realise just how deadly serious Mr. Robot is and just how dangerous he genuinely is. You know, ordinarily a rule in writing would be not to give your dangerous character lines of dialogue where they describe how dangerous they are. I don't know what it is about this character that it works, but it really does work. Because the first time I saw this show, at this point I was like, alright man, they've actually made Christian Slater go full Christian Slater. I guess I should have expected it, but here we are. Actually, given the shift in personalities, I think another thing we have to bear in mind is just how crazy it looks to the people around Elliot, who clearly note that his behaviour is erratic at best.
Yeah,
like he does seem to shift personalities even if they can't quite put their finger on what's going on.
Like, I couldn't imagine Elliot or like Rami Malek doing the whole bang thing with the gun.
Yeah.
I can't picture that.
It is a difficult one to picture, yeah.
But as we will come to see, there are moments later in the show, in fact pretty soon in the show, where we see entire scenes with Christian Slater as Mr. Robot, which are then seen later with Rami Malek as Mr. Robot in that same scene, and it's so good.
It sort of makes me wish we got slightly more of that. I mean, I wouldn't want too much of it, because you can have too much of a good thing where this sort of thing is concerned, but it does make me wish got a wee bit more of it, because I thought that Rami nailed that so well that it's like, oh no, he could definitely convincingly pull this off. It would be nice to maybe, I don't know if it's just deleted scenes with a little more, who knows.
Do you know what? I wish they'd shot everything with Rami Malek as Mr. Robot and released an alternative cut of the show.
That would be incredible. Oh man.
Release the Rami cut.
Right, Sam, fuck your next project. Let's just crowdfund this idea. All Mr. Robot all the time. Meanwhile, Angela turns up at Terry Colby's place, where Terry Colby, in his office, has what I can only describe as the worst portrait I've ever seen. Was this painted by Andy from Twin Peaks? That's another Twin Peaks reference.
I love the looks between like Angela's face and the portrait, just like she's looking in his eyes to try and get some understanding, but at the same time, like, this is a really bad portrait.
Yeah, dude, no shade, but this is literally a terrible painting. So Terry Colby says, "Did the girl get you your tea?" It's like, fuck you, dude. Not even a mention of whoever this person's name is. Did the girl get you some tea?
Hey, I'm misogynist here.
I'm misogynising. So Colby straight up asks, how much do you want? Because money will always be better than whatever you're looking for. Angela proceeds to ask about the 1993 board meeting and if he was present when the decision was made to ignore the treatment of hazardous waste. She says she has information that can help him if he answers. If he agrees to testify against the executives responsible, she'll testify that she broke chain of custody with the DAT file. Essentially, I guess, saying that she was the one that tampered with it. And at this point, he kind of scoffs and says, oh, he remembers her now. He describes her as that hot little piece from Allsafe. So just in case you didn't hate this guy enough already, fucking hell, man.
And he then does the most elaborate Cartman from South Park suck my balls that I've ever seen put on a film.
Yeah, and it's when he moves to the power position behind the desk as well. It's like, okay, no, fuck you, buddy.
Yep.
This is pure Trump behaviour. But yeah, that whole speech. Yeah, fuck you, dude. I love this actor though. He's so great in this role. And I love the guy's voice. It's one of those classic New York actor voices. He's really bringing great energy, but the character's so fucking repugnant.
Hey, you're sucking my balls here.
Once they're nice and snug in there, then repeat your question. That sort of turned into Stan Lee as I was doing it, but you got them.
Excelsior!
Greetings, comics fans. Suck my big hairy balls.
But Angela totally has his number.
Yeah, she handles this like an absolute pro. If you don't take this deal, she says, you'll become like me. People will still think you're guilty. You'll lose everyone's respect, people you know and people you don't. It's a shitty feeling. She gets up and she says, I'll have the girl let me out. Yeah, it's a 1-0 to Angela. Elsewhere, Elliot is taking Flipper to the vet because apparently she ate one of the McCain's microchips. So it turns out she is microchipped, literally. That might be important later. The vet tells him she'll probably puke. The dog will not know what you're doing is good for her. Like this line in here in this episode because I feel like it's a meta commentary on several characters in this show. So Angela's on her way back home when Atara Nayar calls her and says that Terry Colby wants to talk again and she needs to go back. Meanwhile, Darlene meets Cisco outside. What? That library building, by the way, that is beautiful. I'm all about that place. Cisco's get the best job. How did he ever get involved in hacking? She should have just stuck to the library, man. You could have had a good life.
Cisco could have just hacked the books, but not physically.
So Cisco, pretty pissed off that Darlene's been posing as him. I've made a note here. Man crush moment. Cisco is pretty fucking handsome, by the way. It really struck me in this scene.
No, he totally is.
Michael Dreyer, who plays the Cisco, seriously handsome dude. When he's not got the hat on and he's not kind of all slouched, and that's a seriously handsome guy. That's all I'm saying. Can finally forgive Cisco for the thong song. That's a hip reference to a raunchy pop hit from the early 2000s. So he says, are you trying to get us both killed? You didn't have to make me look like a shitty foot soldier. Doesn't want to see her again. Don't speak to me or my son ever again, I think he says.
You had the balls to ask for White Rose with my shit. And again, there's these little seeds being planted. Rose seeds, if you will. That White Rose is not someone to be fucked with.
A seriously big deal. Not small fry. He says, you fools got your wish because the meeting's on. I tell you to be careful, but I know that's the last thing you're going to be. You sure got Darlene's number.
Meanwhile,
back in Terry Colby's home office, Angela's back. Terry's wife's looking over the paperwork. Colby says he can't afford any trips. Angela says, I'm not going to trip. Which is a real tragic note when you consider the journey that Angela ultimately goes on. So Colby's confused by what Angela wants. Says, I know you hate me, but what's in this for you? And Angela insists he tell her about the meeting in question. Now, I love this exchange, man. This actually is one of my favourite character exchanges in the entire show.
Oh, yeah. The story of the meeting is so bland.
It's brilliant, and I love that Colby thinks he's got the upper hand because he says, kind of scoffs and says, okay, I get it. You've got some idea that it's all sort of evil laughter in a boardroom, cigars and all that. He says the world doesn't work like that. And Angela very calmly, coolly says, tell me how it works. And so he sort of blandly remembers, well, Elaine brought shrimp cocktail. I'm doing Stan Lee again, I don't care. Jim was chain smoking and drinking a river of scotch, and Jack Kirby was joined the thing. It's clobbering time. And he mentions it was raining. And basically trying to make it sound as nondescript as possible, which essentially it is.
Which, to be fair, right, this was 2015, right, that this was made, and he's remembering something from January 1993.
Right, something from 22 years before, yeah.
I can't remember stuff from 22, like, weeks ago.
But Angela sums it up so beautifully. After Terry thinks he's gotten the upper hand, she says, so, you were drunk, eating shrimp cocktail, and it was raining when you decided my mother would die? And Kobe just has that moment where it's like...
His face.
I guess
like
that is
crushed.
what I said.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful moment. And in Angela's line, man, this line, she says, that's why. So people like you will not keep sitting in rooms together. And fucking mic drop, boom, boom, wada-da-dang, as Roots Reggae Powerhouse Hemper Sativa would say. Wait, James, is this another episode of F Subreggity?
I think it might be.
Roll the music.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
Hello and welcome to, yes, another episode of F Subreggity, the podcast in which I, Craig Woods, attempt to plant in the mind of James Hamilton some kind of appreciation of reggae music. And so far, not too bad. I think we're doing okay. Let's see if we can keep that run rolling.
Yep.
So James, I've sent you another link there.
How's this going to compare to Greentea Peng? That's the question.
I think I already know the answer to this.
I know it's not a competition, but...
It's not a competition, but nonetheless, on our previous episode, I did mention the recent death of reggae legend Uroy.
Press F Sobriety.
Press F Sobriety for Uroy. He was one of the purveyors of the toasting vocal style, and I remember saying I think that's an angle into roots reggae. It would probably be easy for you to dig that kind of stuff. Hempress Sativa, she does sing more melodically as well, but she also does this very hard toasting style, and this I mean, her vocals on this, I don't know how you could not enjoy this, but give it a spin to see what you think, and I'll insert the caveat here of, you know, watch out for white men with dreadlocks.
Which is a rule I live by. Alright, I'm pressing play now. This is Paolo Nutini Dub Files. Featuring Empress Sativa.
Well,
It's live.
It sure is live.
Your Highness Empress Sativa, the lyrical machine.
Proper rhythm, if you will.
Is it a lyrical machine?
She is a lyrical machine. She has every right to call herself that. She's earned those stripes.
The white man with the dreadlocks is doing classic guy with a mixing desk hand motions. There's no need for him to move any of those faders.
Hey, he's cool with Empress Sativa, so he's cool with me.
Oh, I just heard a wee rougher than them. Good. She is rougher than them.
But she has all the authority on the mic of a great MC, and she is literally a lyrical machine as discussed, but her wordplay is pretty special. Obviously, listeners who might struggle with Jamaican patois, some of the nuances might go over your head, but even if it does, the sheer quality of her voice alone is just so great, and it's very, very driving, very propulsive. Yeah, just on that raw sensory level, it's great shit. How are you feeling about it so far?
It's definitely got some bass.
It's got the groove.
It's alright.
Well, it doesn't sound too positive.
It's not hating it. Hang on.
I thought you were going to say, oh, hang on, hating it now.
No, hang on. She's just started spitting.
Yeah.
Is that your toasting right there?
That is. As the guy in Mortal Kombat would say, toasty!
I definitely enjoy it more when she's spitting.
I figured as much. But you're digging that part at least.
The guy's off-putting.
Pretend you can't see him. Close one eye.
She's off. She's like, you keep doing the dub delay, I'm away to the bar. It's like in the middle of an episode of F-Sobriety. Aye.
You don't sound massively enthused.
I enjoyed her vocal delivery when she was doing the spitting the toast. In terms of groove, there was the groove, but it didn't grab me quite as much as Greentea Peng.
It's more about that. I wanted you to hear more her vocal style, so that's what we're concentrating on. On that basis alone, 5 out of 9. Go for it.
It was better than average.
Christ, you are the worst.
I'd give it a 5. I'd give it 5 5s out of 9.
Really?
Yep.
Right, okay, it's back to the drawing board.
You've yet to hit me with a shiter, to be fair. I mean, I don't think that would make the playlist.
That's a criminal response. You make me sick, Hamilton. And on that note, this has been another slightly less successful episode of F-Sobriety. Toodle pip.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
Meanwhile...
Goodish ep. Terry
good
Colby says... It did give him pause, this whole thing. But again, you go home, you have dinner, you wake up next morning, and he sort of trails off, realising that his words are kind of meaningless. And what I love about this scene particularly is that, and I know I've said this before, this really is kind of the truth about the way corporate capitalism works. It is everyday banality of evil type shit. You know, all of these kind of decisions are made on a regular basis without any real concern for the fact that they are real things. The same people who make those decisions do go home at night and they would act shocked when hearing about similar things that have taken place elsewhere. There is just this other part of the brain, you know. I think I mentioned this on this podcast before, although I cannot remember if it made it into the podcast and it got edited out. I don't remember. But the example I always like to bring up is the thing about climate change, because it's not so much that people at the upper echelons of corporate capitalism don't believe climate change is real. They do believe climate change is real. It's just that they're so caught up in the world of short-term goals and short-term prospects that the idea of thinking in the long term, if acting to help things be a little better in the long term was to have a negative impact on profits in the short term, then they're just not going to pursue it, because that's just not the world they live in. Their entire psychology is all about profits in the short term. If you're not making money right now, you're not making money. And that's how this entire system works. So there is this kind of cognitive dissonance amongst all these people in these positions of crazy, crazy power in corporate entities that now are, you know, out of control, because there is next to no way to regulate them anymore. And what I love about this scene is that this scene brings that right down to the human microcosm, and you see it on Terry Colby's face, and you see as he runs out of words to say, realizing that, you know, there is no defense for this. It just is what it is. That's just the world he's lived in.
Yep.
It's fucking great stuff.
I don't know if it's a moment of clarity, but it is at least some sort of realization of, like, everything I'm saying right now is meaningless. Again, the actor, whose name I don't have written down here.
I think it's Bruce Altman.
He's great. He's so great in that role.
All right, so elsewhere, Ecor Party.
Philip price drop. It's a price drop.
We are pleased to announce a price drop. This is only our second appearance for Philip Price in the series so far, which is crazy considering how big a presence he becomes in the show. But he is toasting Scott Knowles, not toasting him in a reggae way, toasting him as new CTO, and comments that he's smart enough to have married a woman his equal.
Do you know who else was smart enough to have married that woman? Johnny Lee Miller, because Michelle Hicks is Johnny Lee Miller's wife.
Oh wow, no way. Interesting. Star of Hackers, Johnny Lee Miller.
Yep.
It's all connected. Alex Jones gif. So Terrell and Joanna are looking on, and Joanna, I love the encouraging pat on the back she gives Terrell, as if to say, go on, go get her, go on. So Terrell approaches Shannon while all the attention is on Scott. He says, I see that you shared our moment with our husband. She says, "Oh, so you're salty about that kind of thing? Sense defeat in you and all this kind of thing." And Terrell saying he considers himself reprimanded. Sharon finds it disappointing, says, "One tiny curveball, you give up." So Terrell decides to get back on the horse. He says, "Come to my office." She refuses. He says he does not recall presenting it as a question.
And she says, "Well, I'm just not going to go."
Yeah. And he says, "Well, the roof then." Just like that. The roof. He says, "The cameras have been out for a while." Now, why would anybody follow this guy to a rooftop?
I've got in block capital letters in my notes here, "Don't go to the fucking roof."
I mean, I get this, the whole psychosexual game between these characters in the weird, warped world that these corporate exec types live in, but seriously, have a bit of savvy, for Christ's sake.
To be fair, right, she doesn't assume he's going to kill her.
No, I know.
Neither does he. He's going to have a totally normal one up on that roof.
The roof, eh? What could go wrong? So, all safe, Angela is... she's breaking up with Gideon. Gideon, quite rightly, not remotely buying Angela's story here and buying her taking responsibility for breaking chain of custody. And he's insistent that, quite rightly in this position, the entire company is quite likely to go down. Of course, what he doesn't know is that Terrell has already told us, the audience, that the company's going to get down anyway. But from Gideon's perspective, this is, his entire livelihood and the staff that he tries his best to care about. Even though, I'm still not forgiving him for that whole let them all queue outside your fucking house for the dinner party shenanigan.
Yep, and joke about their employee numbers with your husband.
Right, yeah. Well, I guess we'll just let that go for now. So yeah, this is the worst possible news for Gideon. And it's another example of a micro versus macro situation. I will say this is the first time watching this, and I know we've commented before when we're doing this rewatch that we are zoning in on details a bit more than we have in our previous binge watches. But this is the first time I've really, in this scene, really sat and considered what this means for Gideon in this moment. And it is pretty gutting to have a trusted employee come and really stab you in the back, is what it seems like from Gideon's perspective. And because we know Angela, we understand what her motivations are. And Gideon will understand it on the surface. But for Angela to walk in and say, "So yeah, I'm totally going to sink the company," essentially, is essentially what happens here.
This is really the start of the downfall for Gideon.
It is, yeah.
It's nothing but bad news for Gideon from here on out.
It really is. We already know that Gideon was suspicious prior to this about the DAT file, because we did get that brief scene of him checking up on it, and then he had brought it up to Elliot again. So as much as Gideon is a patsy in this story, he's not completely dumb. He definitely knew there was more afoot, and I think that's definitely playing into his distrust of Angela here, as well as just the fact that, he knows the entire company is going to get down if she does this. So, yeah, sad reacts only. So, back over on said rooftop, aforementioned, Sharon Knowles finally follows Terrell and gives it, "You intrigued me, I intrigued back." Now, this whole scene, up until a certain point, I get total vibes of late 80s, 90s erotic thrillers, which, even the way it's shot, the cinematography and everything, the iconography of the skyline in the background, it's very of the era of, Disclosure and Indecent Proposal, that era of erotic thrillers where sex was a thing that only ever seemed to happen between very wealthy people and in the seediest possible fashion. And all of the scripts were written by Joe Esterhaz. I feel like Sam was deliberately channeling some of that aesthetic here.
Yeah, the language and everything they use as well. When Sharon says, "My husband's downstairs getting the job you want, and you're up here trying to fuck me."
Yes, right. Even the dialogue. By the way, that line of dialogue right there would not be out of place of the Paul Verhoeven classic Showgirls.
Yep.
It's that kind of quality, but for some reason the context of these characters, it kind of works. So she says, "Scott plans on firing you and you seem desperate." And Terrell certainly is desperate. I've got a note here actually about the way this scene is shot, about the way the camera frames the shots. First of all, this roof is not quite as high as we might imagine this roof was going to be. It's considerably lower down than most of the other buildings in the vicinity. And I think it's an interesting reflection of the way that Terrell, as much as he is on top of certain sections of the world, he clearly is aspiring to go higher. And a lot of the shots, I did notice, have an upward sort of angle. so they're looking up on everything. So when you see the Empire State Building in the background, it is tapered slightly by the angle, and you do get that sense, I think, of this is how Tyrell is viewing this landscape. He feels he belongs here, he's just not quite attained it yet, he's not quite attained the height he needs to get to. And it's beautiful touches like this in this show that are just filmmaking masterclass stuff.
Needle drop.
Yeah, Needle Drop, FK Twigs, 2 weeks, an amazing song. It also is, the lyrics of that song are also quite, they're sexy and scary simultaneously, so it's a perfect needle drop. It also has that kind of driving beat with Twigsy's very sultry, soft voice. There's just something about that combination of elements, while Tyrell and Sharon are getting down in the seediest way possible. It's one of many moments in this show where there's just these what should be jarring juxtapositions, which is actually just meld together really beautifully.
Tyrell freaks it. He's freaked it. He thought the birthday card was from Blue.
That's a hip Lemmy reference for you kids.
So
I'm gonna have to link that video in the episode description.
So what drives him to that? Because this is clearly not his plan.
So here's the big question: why did he end up opting for this course of action? He does seem to opt for it in the heat of the moment, so it definitely was not planned. And I think it's pointing to something that we've sort of hinted at before on previous episodes, that as much as there is that methodical side to Tyrell, there is a far less easy to contain id in Tyrell, that, you know, it's the same side of him that wants to punch homeless guys in the Coopin, but just suddenly comes out in this unbridled way because he feels so powerless. I think he's got himself into a game here where he's realised he's not the superior player, and I think part of what happens here is it's just pure rage that comes out. It's like when someone who has themselves been reprimanded and they feel they've been unjustly reprimanded. It's like sometimes you'll see a kid do it, like they'll go outside and they'll start kicking shit.
Yeah.
Or they'll smash one of their toys or something. It's like that kind of thing. It's like that part of Tyrell's id is just out of control, and it's taken over any conscious decisions or any plan that he might have had here.
He should have listened to Joanna.
And Joanna is clearly the superior player in this relationship. She's clearly the composed one, which, by the way, to link back to the earlier question I was raising about the fridging of women in this show, one of the reasons it works so well with Joanna is that is a devastating blow for the show because she's such a great character, but it's also a devastating blow for Tyrell because she was actually the strong one in the relationship. And one of the things this show has always been good at, I think, from quite early on, is portraying a world where actually nobody is safe. So even the people very high up the ladder who seem like they're untouchable are fair game in this world, and the revolution that Mr. Robot and F Society are unleashing and all of its consequences are kind of having a knock-on effect in the world at large. And so someone as completely in control as Joanna, it does make sense that even she's not safe. But yeah, I feel like she would definitely handle this better. She could even have seduced Sharon better than this.
Yeah. The acting here, though, from Martin Wallstrom when he realises what he's done is like...
It's brilliant.
It's pure panic.
Yeah, it's pure schoolboy panic. He's got that look about me. He looks like a wee boy immediately afterwards. He just looks so perturbed and so
He's
lost.
so good at looking like a wee boy. There's so many moments in this show where Tyrell Wellick, instead of looking like American Psycho, Ultimate Wall Street suave guy, just looks like a daft wee guy.
There is a very boyish kind of side to him, yeah, definitely. After Sharon's been killed, another shot I love here is the very peculiar framing from above of Sharon's body against the street below. It's just like all the angles and everything's so angular, everything's like a mathematical puzzle, and it's like it's this world of order but with this woman's destroyed body in the centre. And it's just like another nice metaphor of the way this show is just exploring the themes of, amongst these most upper echelon characters, this, you know, the chaos is about to be unleashed. Everything is about to collapse. Yeah, it's incredible. This whole scene, man, it seems like part of it's But in certain aspects, it seems like it's been taken from an entirely different show or from a different movie. But within the context of the show, it just works so well. He's no bad at the filmmaking, that Sam guy.
He should stick with it.
You stick with it. Stick with it, mate. Then we come to what I am calling the Eye of the Duck scene in this episode, which is outside the university with the aforementioned scene between Darlene and Trenton. Darlene wants to get F Society back together, and Trenton completely has Darlene's number. Calling back to the scene at the arcade a couple of episodes ago, she says, "You didn't care if pushing that button would bring an economic revolution. You just wanted momentary anarchy." And this seems to ring completely true for Darlene, and we can tell from her expression that Trenton has said something she's recognised to be true. Trenton has a great speech here. She goes through all the characters, saying that all the reasons they want to be involved make her sick.
Mobley likes palling around. Romero wants fame. Those reasons depress me.
Yep. I note she excludes Darlene and Elliot as though they are one and the same.
Yep.
Which I feel like should have been another one of those slight clues.
Doesn't mention Mr. Robot, obviously.
Right, yeah, exactly. Nothing to see here. So Darlene presses Trenton for what her reason is. And Trenton says, her family had emigrated from Iran, and her dad works 60-hour weeks to determine tax loopholes for a millionaire art dealer, while her mother runs up loads to 5 digits for an online degree. And they both think America is great, and yet they're going to both die in debt doing things they never wanted to do. The reason this speech is so great, not just because it seems to really touch Darlene and be exactly what Darlene needs to hear in this moment to motivate her in a certain direction, but it also encompasses what I think is at the heart of the show, because it's bringing the social political subjects right down to a very human level. And it's doing it in a simplistic way. I mean, there's nothing particularly flashy or even particularly profound about that dialogue, but the fact that this is the first time in this show we've really gotten anything personal from Trenton. This is the first time we've really got a chance to get to know who she is, and the fact she unloads like this I just think is so refreshing. And I love Sunita Mani anyway.
What we're getting here, Craig, with her speech about the other members of F Society and then what we learned from her, we are viewing their source code, if you will.
Get in, there it is. Every single episode. Yeah, once again, this is the benefit of doing it episode by episode. Darlene says, somehow you and I landed together at the right place and time with the right resources. We just need to see this through. And what I find interesting about this is not just Darlene talking up Trenton. I feel like Trenton and Darlene are now on a level. I think that's what this scene is telling us. Trenton knows when Darlene is bullshitting her, and Darlene knows that she knows. And Darlene herself, I think, from this moment onwards, you can see her having her own evolution in terms of how she is looking towards what F Society are doing and what exactly it means. We spoke before about how Darlene seems desperate, and we do, of course, know later in the show that she suffers from panic attacks. And she is someone who just needs a purpose. And it only seems to be from this point onwards that she really starts to consider maybe there is a meaning to my personal purpose, that it can have a meaning to other people, you know. And I love that it's Trenton that lights that spark. And it's something that's easy to miss, because I will admit the first couple of times I watched this show through, even though I was paying attention to this scene, I wasn't ever thinking back to it as being a kind of pivotal moment for Darlene, whereas now, because I'm so focused on it, just this single episode, I'm like, oh no, this scene is actually pretty core in terms of Darlene's evolution as a character.
And it's also another exemplifier of, like, where is our Trenton and Darlene spin-off show that we want?
True that. And we know that Darlene does come to embrace the social-political rationale behind the revolution later, when we see her embody that in the later seasons, particularly from season 2 onwards, when she actually has to take charge of F Society. And I can't wait to talk about that stuff when she starts wearing that military jacket, like American Revolutionary War general. Man, that stuff is so good. So yeah, we can definitely see that Trenton helped open that door into Darlene becoming more socially conscious and more genuine in the mission. So, beautiful short scene, lovely stuff.
Cut to Ollie drop.
Ollie, aka the world's worst, exits the gym, concentrating on his abs. Cisco is lurking outside. Ollie takes one look up, says, I'm going to call the police. To which Cisco has this great moment when he pantomimes calling the police. Hi, operator. I put a malicious CD in my work's computer and now this guy outside the gym is trying to say hi to me.
I've summarised that in my notes as Cisco rips the absolute pish.
He tells him, if you don't do what I say, the giant shitstorm that rains turds later will leave a trail of clouds in the sky spelling out your name. Which, of all the nuggets of dialogue in this episode, that is one of the best.
I love how Ollie's trying to offload him on Angela as well. He's like going, why don't you call the girl that's into this?
Yeah, that girl I said I loved. Give her all the hassle. Alright, so we have our denouement at Krista's office. Elliot turns back up, claims he's here for his appointment. And Krista, not arguing, clearly pleased that he's come back, says, you can slip in before the first patient. Man, this scene... Rami Malek does so much with the dialogue, and Gloria Rubin does so much with absolutely nothing, and they're both fantastic.
Glorious Rubin, if you will.
More like. So Elliot admits he's been lying, he's not been taking his pills, but he knows that she's not been taking hers. Her refills do not match her prescriptions. This is great shit. This whole ream of detail about Krista's life that he just starts rhyming off. About her latte, her texter sister, her patient Marilyn O'Brien, that's her own doppelganger, that she's encouraging to leave her husband because she's tired of being dumped. Knows that she likes porn, especially anal. Whether she likes that for herself, not relevant to him. I love the matter-of-fact delivery of all this stuff. It's so great, because it's not like... He's unloading all this stuff in a way that's... Just so you know, it's not in a seedy way.
Mm-hmm. It's like, but, I mean, I don't care if you like it, but I know that you like it
whatever.
in porn.
Yes. Yeah. You told your best friend, Jennifer, that you wish your mother would die. Whew, man. Sometimes I watch you on your webcam. You cry sometimes, just like me, because you're lonely. This is where the tears start. With both of them. Slow motion tears, they're both so good, man.
But I love when he goes on to justify it. Like, I don't just hack you, I hack everyone.
Friends, colleagues, everyone.
But I've helped a lot of people. I just want a way out of loneliness like you. The devastation.
Is that what you wanted to hear? I love that the episode ends with the question hanging. Oh, it's so great. I remember the first time I watched this, I don't know about you, but the first time I watched this, I was in no doubt that Krista wasn't going to shop Elliot or anything like that. Was never in my mind. Mm-hmm. I knew that Krista, the show was going to do something clever with her character, and that she had already been nuanced enough that it wasn't just going to be a case of, okay, creepazoid, get out of my face, which, you know, some people would say might be the natural reaction, but... Again, it's, you know, we know Krista is dedicated to her profession, and I think also there is the suggestion here, as Elliot is putting it forward, that there is some connection between them, that they understand each other. And I think this is one of the areas where the show is trying to suggest that as much as Elliot is in a very extreme case, the kind of neuroses that he has they're very emblematic of a kind of mass neuroses that a lot of people are suffering through, that a lot of people relate to. So one of the reasons why I think fans of this show sometimes get very obsessive about this angle of it, because they think this is my story, and they become very protective about that. And there's positive and negatives to that, but it's incredibly great writing.
It's people looking for a way out of loneliness. That line, there's a line that should have been like legendary on the internet.
Yeah, actually, and I mean similarly, it's a very simple line. But you would not find that in a Hallmark card.
Unless someone was really trying to fuck with you.
Here's to my fellow friend also trying to find a way out of loneliness. That's not a thing people would say in a card. They might write it, but you're not going to find that printed. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a simple and very effective and profound in its own way line. And that is where that episode leaves us. God damn it, Esmail. He can't keep getting away with it.
Let's jump to the most important part of the episode. Okay. 5 out of 9, Craig.
I'm scoring this episode, view source, season 1, episode 7. I am scoring it 8 5s out of 9.
I would have almost given this a perfect score, were it not for the fact that I then watched episode 8 immediately after it, and remembered that episode 8
a perfect score.
Is a perfect score episode, and this episode, as brilliant as it is, isn't quite as good. So I'm going to give this episode, season 1, episode 7, view source, also 8 5s out of 9.
Check it out, simpatico.
Clink.
Now, a quick question on this episode. Sam Esmail directed 3 in total episodes in this first season. And he obviously cherry-picked the ones he wanted to direct. As showrunner, that would be his privilege.
Yep.
Why do you think he chose this one? Because the reason I ask is because compared to some of the other episodes, it's actually kind of Elliot light, and it focuses a lot more on the other characters.
It's Elliot light in so much as we see Rami Malek not a lot, but it's
Sure.
also Mr.
That's
Robot
true,
in it.
yeah.
So maybe he wanted to direct it because he wanted those actors portraying essentially the same character to be on point with what they were doing.
Make sure they got the nuances of each one right.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that occurs to me is that, given some of the things we've discussed here, it is another pivotal episode for Angela, and it also has that pivotal moment between Darlene and Trenton. And I think maybe Sam wanted to make sure that he was paying just enough attention to those stories as he was to Elliot's story.
Or maybe he just really likes directing episodes with Philip Price in them.
Well, there's always that, and who can blame him? That guy can project. But I think it might be that he wanted to make sure that for these pivotal moments for the other characters, that he was in charge of administering that in a way. Because as much as people remember this show, the people who are not mad obsessives about it, like weirdos like ourselves and the We Live in a Society mob, I think a lot of people just remember this as being Elliot's story. A lot of people kind of forget about Darlene, they kind of forget about Angela. It's not the thing that's in the forefront in their mind, where I think this episode and the way Sam chose to direct it very much suggests that he wanted to make clear, or even if it was just for himself, he wanted to make sure that he was on the ball with how these early pivotal moments were dealt with.
Which is curious because I would have assumed that he would have directed one of the next two episodes. But more on that next time.
Alright, yeah, so that wraps up coverage of Mr. Robot Season 1, Episode 7.
Thanks for listening, guys.
I think we are going to be back with another consecutive Mr. Robot episode for our next podcast. I think that's going to be the plan, and I think we'll probably rattle through and do a double bill of Season 1, Episodes 8 and 9. I think that's probably the way forward, do you think?
I think that's about right, which will leave us with only Episode 10 to do after that of Season 1. We'll sort of mix that episode into
we could do a Season 1 wrap-up episode. That works for me. Before we wrap up here, I just wanted to mention something that I'd actually forgotten to mention in like 2 consecutive podcasts now. There was a pretty good video interview on YouTube with Sam Esmail during lockdown, and he touches a lot on Mr. Robot and also some projects that he's working on currently. So I think what I'll do is I'll link that in the show notes for this episode. So if any of you haven't seen that for any reason, I recommend you give it a wee spin.
Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. If you're listening to this on iTunes or any other podcast provider where you can leave a rating or a review, we would really appreciate if you left us a rating or a review.
Yeah, that would be most helpful. It's the best way for the podcast to get noticed. So if you enjoy what you hear, we sure would appreciate it. And as always, we love you all for listening.
Yeah, if you're listening to us on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment, tell a friend, tell someone else's friend, shout it at a stranger in the street.
But not too close. Social distancing, guys. We're still under lockdown here. All right. James, I'm just taking a look at my wine bottle here.
Okay, I'll just check mine. I'll just check mine too.
And it kind of looks like... You hear that?
I hear that. That doesn't sound full and it doesn't sound empty.
It's got the telltale timbre of half the bottle.
Toodle pip.
Toodle pip.
F Sobriety, Episode 13, Social Disticuffs, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors, available on the UK album chart-topping record label Rock Action Records. Put up your social dukes at facebook.com/fsobrietypodcast, on Instagram at fsobrietypodcast, on Twitter at fsobrietycast, or search YouTube for F Sobriety Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe there, so we can get that fancy pants custom URL. That's our plan anyway. And God is laughing.
On this podcast, we have
This isn't an
soul.
episode of F's... Fuck, I was hoping for something funny to happen just as I said that. F-Soulbriety. F-Soulbriety. Never mind. I'm going to cut this all out.
This is going to end. To paraphrase Albert Rosenfield, and it's another great day in music podcasting history.
Apologies in advance for James.